Hey guys, tonight we chase shimmering legends and dusty bedrolls deep into the heart of the Sahara, where Zerzura's hidden oasis glows like emerald glass under a scorching sun and a starlit ceiling. Imagine you're huddled around a flickering campfire, listening as a wizened Bedouin elder leans in to describe palms reaching skyward, watering holes, and marble columns half buried in dunes. You can almost taste the dryness on your tongue and feel the crunch of sand underfoot. Frankly, you might not survive the first night if you wander off alone in these dunes. But that's what makes it a great story, right? Legends even say that restless camels will murmur warnings if you stray too close to the mirage's edge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Then drop a comment telling me what city you're in and what time it is where you are right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In that hush of the desert night, you settle onto a woven mat beside the dying embers of the fire. Flickers of orange dance against taut camelskin tents, and the wind carries distant strains of oud strings from another camp. A low chant begins, sung in a dialect only the oldest among the Bedouin seem to remember. The elder's voice is soft but firm as he begins. They call it the whispered oasis, for only those who listen with their heart can find its water. The story reaches back centuries, some say as far as the Ptolemaic era, when Greek scholars first recorded rumors of a lush refuge beyond the bleak dunes. Ptolemy himself mentioned a city of palms that gleamed under the midday sun, though he never revealed its coordinates. Historians are still debating whether these accounts refer to a real settlement or a poetic mirage, but the Bedouin swear by their elders' tales. As you lean forward, the elder uncorks a leather flask of sweet mint tea and hands it to you. Steam curls upward like a genie's laugh. You lift the cup with sand-kissed fingers and sip, tasting notes of mint, honey, and desert dust. Meanwhile, the story unfolds. Centuries ago, a clan of nomads stumbled upon a depression in the dunes so deep that saltwater springs pooled at its bottom. Over time, clusters of date palms shot skyward, bending under the weight of golden fruit. According to lore, Zerzura's founders carved terraces into the valley walls and built aqueducts from white limestone. By the time caravans from Nubia and Egypt arrived, they discovered a garden in the wasteland, a jewel in a crown of sand. This oasis became a sanctuary. Merchants bartered frankincense and myrrh, scholars debated under shaded colonnades, and children laughed along narrow alleyways. Arab geographer al-Yaqubi wrote of a city, rank with scented blossoms, in the 9th century CE. Yet no trace of gardens or graffiti survives beyond those dusty scrolls. A sudden gust ripples the sleeping camp, and the fire snaps. Your heart flutters. The elder lowers his voice. Only the worthy may see Zerzura. It is said that when the desert itself wills it, the oasis appears to a single true seeker, if that soul remains pure. You imagine yourself trekking across endless dunes, heat shimmering off the horizon like liquid gold. The Bedouin warn that mirages prey on hope. Thirsty travelers run themselves ragged chasing visions of cool pools, only to collapse in delirium. One seldom-told account speaks of a group of merchants who vanished after following a dancing arch of palm fronds. Their camels returned alone, spooked, with footprints leading nowhere. Did that actually happen? Scholars argue over the authenticity of that tale. Some believe it was a warning woven to keep outsiders away. Historians are still debating this question. Leaning back, you notice a tiny reed flute now drifting through the orange haze. A boy from the camp sits cross-legged, fingering the instrument. He plays a haunting melody said to be passed down from Zerzurian priests. Legend claims that the flute's tune carries a secret map. Every rise and fall of the notes marks a dune ridge or rocky outcrop. Few can decode its patterns, and fewer still survive the journey. Between sips of tea, you study the stars overhead. Polaris glimmers like a beacon, but the Bedouin use a different guide. The Palm Cluster, a constellation formed by stars that, if followed on certain nights, point directly toward the oasis. Their sky chart differs from Ptolemaic and later Islamic astronomers. It's a tradition so old that even some desert nomads no longer remember its origin. This little-known sky map once guided traders of frankincense and exotic spices from Yemen, long before the camel caravans dipped into sub-Saharan trade routes. A breeze carries a distant wolf's howl, and the elder nods. Remember, the desert tests you not once, but 10 times. Thirst, hunger, sunstroke, loneliness, greed, envy, fear, doubt, fatigue, and folly. Zerzura reflects what you hide inside. You shift on your mat, feeling the coarse weave against your palm. In that moment, every rustle of sand feels alive, each grain a silent witness. The desert's voice is subtle, an unending susurration that, if listened to carefully, reveals hidden valleys and salt-crusted springs. Then the elder reaches beneath his cloak and produces a fragment of papyrus bound by sinew. Under the flickering light, faded ink shows crude sketches, palm-fringed courtyards, stone arches, and mysterious glyphs. He says these royal scrolls passed through many hands. Traders, scribes, even a hermit scholar who claimed moonlight revealed the text's secrets. You lean closer and trace the jagged lines. According to the scroll, Zerzura's water supply flowed from an underground aquifer linked to a distant mountain range, perhaps the same source that fed the Nile's tributaries. Mainstream archaeologists agree that many desert oases relied on foothill springs, but no one has yet matched Zerzura's rumored location to any known aquifer. That has sparked fierce academic debate over whether Zerzura even existed as a physical city or remained a metaphor for spiritual refuge. A new chill drifts in as the fire dies to embers. Your skin prickles. It's easy to imagine the oasis shimmering into view just beyond the camp's periphery. A ring of palms, a turquoise pool reflecting sapphire sky. In truth, no European cartographer of the Middle Ages ever recorded its coordinates, and many maps show only empty dunes. Still, Bedouin caravans carried rumors of buried temples and marble shafts rising above sand flats like lost obelisks. You settle deeper into the night, and the elder's voice becomes a low hum alongside the wind. He recounts a bizarre ritual. Before setting out, some tribes would tie a live falcon to the lead camel's saddle. If the bird took flight at sunrise, they believed the desert itself blessed their journey. If it refused, death or madness awaited. Few mention this now, perhaps because it sounds too cruel, but whispers persist. Your mind drifts to the idea of a falcon circling above bright palms, its cry echoing across the dunes. You wonder if the bird truly sensed hidden water, or merely followed instinct. Scholars remain divided. Is the falcon ritual a factual survival tactic or later embellishment by story spinners? Historians are still debating this question. Night deepens. The temperature drops and a thin mist curls at ground level, an odd occurrence in the Sahara, where dew is nearly unheard of. The elder explains it as the desert's breath when Zerzura stirs beneath the surface. Few believe such mysticism, but even skeptics admit feeling inexplicable coolness on certain nights. That curious phenomenon has been noted in travelers' journals since the 13th century, though meteorologists struggle to explain it. You lean back and let the silence wash over you, punctuated by the soft scratch of quills from camel harnesses. The story lingers in the air like incense smoke. For a moment, the oasis seems real. Palm fronds whisper, birdsong drifts from unseen garden groves, and a distant fountain splashes against marble. You close your eyes, letting imagination fill every sense. When you open them, the camp is still. The elder sits quietly, as if waiting for you to ask a question. You realize that the real oasis may not lie beyond the dunes at all, but here, in the collective memory of those who refuse to let its legend die. And maybe that is the truest form of survival. A final gust sweeps embers into gray ash. You rise from the mat, sand clinging to your clothes, and nod to the elder. He smiles, revealing carved lines on his face like ancient maps. Rest now, he murmurs. Tomorrow, the desert will reveal more. If you listen. You stand, heart pounding with both excitement and a whisper of fear. The night feels alive, as though the dunes themselves watched you depart. With each step back toward your own tent, you carry a fragment of the whispered oasis in your mind. An echo of water, palm shade, and endless possibility under the desert sky. Heat shimmers across the dunes, creating illusions of distant water that beckon with an impossible promise. Soon you push yourself upright, sand clinging to your fingers as you wipe sweat from your brow. The midday sun presses down with unrelenting intensity, and though every cell in your body cries out for relief, curiosity drives you forward. Faint ripples shimmer at the horizon, mirages that glint like polished glass, mocking the parched lips of travelers who dare to chase them. A single step into the baked sand sends grains skittering beneath your boots. Ahead, a turquoise pool appears nestled between two crescent dune ridges, its surface so placid that you half expect to see fish darting beneath the distortion. Heart pounding, you break into a jog, imagining the cool splash of water against sunburned skin. Each pace quickens, each breath grows ragged. But as you crest the next dune, the pool collapses into a blur of gold and ochre, as if painted on the air itself. Legends stretch back to antiquity. Aristotle observed mirages over the Hellespont, noting how layers of air at varying temperatures refract light. Medieval Islamic scholars like al-Haytham later elaborated on these phantom waters, describing how hot desert air near the ground bends rays from cooler layers above. Modern science dubs the effect a superior mirage, when objects appear elevated, and an inferior mirage, when the illusion lies below the horizon line. Bedouin storytellers, however, give it a different name: Gaith al-Khail, the reign of imagination. In one oft-whispered cautionary tale, a caravan of frankincense traders encountered a vast lake that stretched to the horizon. They lowered goatskin waterskins into its apparent depths, then prodded the surface with long reeds. When thirst drove them to drink, only dust-laden air rushed into their flasks. Emboldened by desperation, they camped at the shore for 3 nights, only to vanish by dawn of the 4th. Their campfires and camels remained, but the traders themselves were never seen again. Historians are still debating whether that caravan ever existed or was a parable meant to tether reckless wanderers to caution. Beneath your sandals, the sand feels like powdered glass heated by a forge. The desert's surface temperature can soar above 60 degrees Celsius in places, making the air shimmer so violently that your limbs feel detached from the world. An obscure Bedouin belief holds that these heat waves are the desert's laughter, mocking mortal folly. Some elders insist the dunes themselves conspire to mislead intruders, shifting their contours to amplify deceptive reflections. Drawing your scarf tighter against grit, you clutch a brass compass in one hand and a small iron flask of water in the other. The compass needle quivers in the heat, though magnetism should remain constant, the result of subtle magnetic minerals in the surrounding sandstone. A few scholars argue that desert mirages once gave rise to tales of submerged ruins, where travelers claimed to glimpse columns and archways beneath shimmering water. Historians are still debating whether these reported underwater ruins refer to ancient riverbeds or merely optical illusions. Ibn Battuta, the famed 14th-century Moroccan explorer, recorded in his Rila a vision of distant palm groves shimmering atop the horizon. He described the scene with both awe and frustration. The oasis appeared as if suspended in air, and we feared the heavens had taken pity on our thirst. Modern translations of his manuscripts reveal subtle differences, suggesting copyists occasionally conflated separate encounters into a single dramatic account. That academic uncertainty underscores how real experiences and imaginative retellings intertwined in early travelogues. As the sun tilts westward, the air cools only marginally. You lift your gaze to where heat ripples bend the light, and suddenly a pair of date palms seem to flank a tranquil lagoon. Arms outstretched, you chase that phantom grove until calves burn and water supplies dwindle. Each time you crest a dune, the palms disappear, replaced by empty sand seas. Legend says only the pure of heart glimpsed the oasis without suffering, an illusion possibly drawn from Sufi poetry rather than eyewitness observation. A rare meteorological twist sometimes produces an inverted mirage. Shapes appear upside down, as though the desert were a giant mirror. In polar regions, explorers called it Fata Morgana, after the sorceress Morgan Le Fay of Arthurian lore. In the Sahara, local guides call it Alar's Al-Makluba, the overturned bride, likening the phenomenon to a bridal procession reflected on still water. Few outside the desert ever witness it, an obscure yet enthralling footnote in the annals of optical oddities. When fatigue seeps into your bones, hallucinations follow. You swear slivers of palm fronds rustle just beyond view. A child's laughter rises on the wind, then dissolves into static. Some researchers suggest that extreme dehydration can trigger vivid auditory mirages, an affliction known as Bardou's syndrome after the 19th century French physician who first described phantom sounds in desert patients. Bedouin elders attribute these noises to jinn testing the resolve of those who dare to tread their domain. Further into the afternoon, swirling dunes occasionally reveal patterns, striations carved by wind-blown sand that hint at hidden wadis, ancient riverbeds that once coursed beneath the shifting desert. One dusty scroll fragment recovered from a collapsed tent in the Erg-Czech region references twin wadis called al-Hajaniya and al-Wamiya, meaning the two brothers and the phantom stream. Caravans would camp near these wadis, even when no water appeared, trusting that seasonal changes might awaken unseen springs. Whether those wadis truly held water or simply existed in travelers' hopes remains a matter of fierce academic dispute. Thirst gnaws at your throat as the sun dips lower. Shadows of dunes stretch into a sea of violet and rust. A faint haze now shimmers horizontally, presenting a horizontal band of pale blue. Closer inspection reveals it to be an ethereal line of cloud, formed when sand particles loft moisture from hidden fissures. Few meteorologists have studied desert fog formations, yet Bedouin lore proclaims this desert breath as an omen of relief, or a trick to draw the unwary into mirage's lair. Stepping carefully, you follow an ancient footpath marked by scattered pottery shards. Some shards bear faint impressions of mythic creatures, griffins and lotus flowers, suggesting long-vanished traders left faint traces of their artistry. At the edge of that path, another mirage forms. A domed building with tall columns, reminiscent of a Roman temple. Stories passed down claim that early Byzantine emissaries saw such ruins from a distance, and rumors of a desert city reached Constantinople by the 6th century CE. Yet no archaeological evidence has ever corroborated those accounts, fueling ever wider scholarly debate. A slight wind carries a haunting melody. It's a reed flute, perhaps the same boy from the previous camp has followed you. He sits atop a small rise and plays a single long note that quivers like heat haze. Bedouin tradition holds that the flute song can calm the temper of wayward spirits or jinn, and some guides play it at twilight to ward off night creatures. Whether the melody actually influences unseen forces or simply soothes weary minds remains contested among anthropologists. Stark dunes give way to a smoother, salt-crusted plain, where glints of white betray evaporated pools. Ancient travelers called these sabkas, seasonal basins that collect rainwater and then bake into hard flats. A handful of date palms sometimes survive these flats by tapping deep roots, but most remain barren. The flat surface also intensifies mirages, as heat layers stratify more evenly. Gazing across this plain, the deceptive horizon warps into waves of shimmering color, beckoning you onward. Legends tell of a guide named Hassan al-Sara, who once led a party to the edge of a sabka mirage, and then blew his whistle to stop them. He claimed to see distant ripples that signal danger, salt springs so lethal no camel could survive drinking the brine. His whistle supposedly saved lives, yet no record confirms the party's survival. Some scholars argue that Hassan never existed, that his tale was constructed to illustrate the perils of blindly trusting the eye. Historians are still debating this question. Exhaustion claws at your resolve, and the talisman tucked against your chest feels heavy. It's a small piece of green jasper carved into the shape of a palm leaf, once gifted by a hermit in a mountain desert far north. He told you it would protect your mind from desert illusions, though you're unsure whether faith in the talisman or actual mineral properties offer comfort. Geologists note that jasper can retain coolness longer than surrounding rocks, but that has little bearing on mental clarity. As dusk settles, the sky ignites in ribbons of crimson and lavender. Heat mirages tend to fade as temperatures drop, yet the horizon still flickers with ghostly outlines. A final mirage appears, a ring of palm trunks circling a central pond, the water reflecting the twilight glow like liquid copper. Stepping closer, you expect the refreshing splash, but the pond collapses into empty. Moonlight glints off weathered sandstone cliffs, revealing faint lines that might be natural strata, or something more deliberate. Beneath this silvery glow lies the first hint of a path. Narrow grooves, nearly erased by centuries of wind-blown grit, running toward a dark crevice. Fingers trace the channels, feeling the faint ridges carved by human hands. Legends speak of these secret passages, the hidden gateways that led true seekers straight into the heart of Zerzura, bypassing miles of hostile dunes and deadly mirages. At the edge of the ravine, the entrance yawns like a silent maw. Camels seldom venture here, and their hooves left no indentations in the packed sand. A carved lintel arches overhead, its once ornate relief worn smooth. Whispered Bedouin lore calls it Bab al-Nar, the gate of the river, though no river has graced this latitude in living memory. Early Arab geographers such as al-Yaqubi mentioned mysterious openings in southern cliffs, rumored to lead to underground chambers filled with water and treasure. His 11th century manuscript describes a maw in the rock where daylight yields to shadow, yet no contemporary map records its coordinates. Historians are still debating whether al-Yaqubi's account describes a real gateway or a symbolic admonition to journey inward. Torch in hand, the small party edges into the tunnel's mouth. The air inside is cool, carrying a musty scent of ancient stone and trapped moisture. Each footstep echoes softly, disturbed only by the distant drip of water. Local guides claim that the tunnel slopes gently downward, following an aquifer's pulse. That design echoes Qanat systems found in Persia and Oman, where gently inclined shafts drew groundwater to surface settlements. Mainstream archaeologists note the technological parallels, suggesting knowledge transfer along trans-desert trade routes. Along the rough-hewn walls appear faint handprints, smudged impressions darkened by soot and time. Some panels show crude symbols, interlocking circles, palm fronds, and an unfamiliar stylized falcon. Ethnohistorians propose these marks were wayfinding glyphs, guiding caravans through labyrinthine corridors. A lesser-known theory holds that the glyphs encoded a calendar of water levels, so travelers could predict which passages remained dry or spring-fed. Among the Bedouin, elders still recite that the falcon symbol means clear sky ahead, while the palm cluster assures safe passage near an oasis. Whether these interpretations reflect genuine Zerzurian practice or later Bedouin inventions remains a matter of scholarly contention. Rounding a bend, the corridor narrows to just enough room for two people abreast. Loose stones litter the floor, and the ceiling dips low, forcing bearers to hunch. It's said that Zerzura's builders intentionally designed such cramped sections to slow invaders and control the flow of water through sluice gates. Archaeological surveys across North Africa have uncovered similar defensive features in remote hilltop fortresses. Yet no systematic excavation has ever been attempted here. Too remote, too dangerous, and too enveloped in myth to attract official funding. One guide pauses, holding up a broken shard of ceramic. Its pale blue glaze, cracked but still vivid, evokes Mediterranean workshops of the Byzantine period. Fragments like this have been found at Petra and Sijilmasa, suggesting a vast network of artisans who traded both goods and techniques. Pottery experts believe the shard's design dates to the 6th or 7th century CE. Could Zerzura's founders have enlisted Byzantine craftsmen? The idea blurs the line between history and legend, a tantalizing question that spurs ongoing academic debate. A sudden breeze brushes past, carrying a whisper of sound, water trickling, or perhaps wind winnowing through distant openings. Lantern flames flicker as carriers press forward, and the tunnel opens into a wider chamber. Here, the air tastes faintly of brine. Walls glisten with salt efflorescence, and small stalactites of mineral deposits hang like ivory daggers. Bedouin elders claim this spot was once called the Chamber of Reflection, a place where Zerzurian priests studied the patterns of dripping water to divinate the city's fate. Legend holds that the chamber's floor was originally polished marble, though centuries of sediment have obscured any trace. Local stories speak of a circular basin carved into the rock center, fed by an underground spring. Travelers who knelt to drink were said to experience visions, glimpses of Zerzura's palaces, its domed temples, and its courtyards framed by date palms. One obscure Bedouin chronicle recounts a guide who drank from the basin and fell into a trance, speaking for hours in a lost dialect before returning to consciousness with his hair turned white. Historians are still debating this episode's authenticity, debating whether it reflects genuine Zerzurian ritual or the hyperbole of oral storytelling. Pushing deeper, rough steps ascend toward a secondary hall. Here, nature has breached the structure. Roots from surface shrubs snake through cracks, their green leaves a startling contrast to the ochre stone. A handful of hardy lizards scurry away at the intrusion of human feet. Naturalists note that some desert reptiles have adapted to subterranean habitats, venturing into caves in search of prey and stable temperatures. This peculiar coexistence of built and natural elements gives the gateway a surreal atmosphere. Halfway up the stair, a carved relief emerges. Two figures, one wearing a plumed helmet, the other crowned with a headdress of palm stalks, stand flanking a doorway. Their features are weathered, but you can still discern armor etched with spiral motifs and robes draped in elegant folds. Some scholars suggest these figures represent Zerzura's legendary founder king and his queen priestess, perhaps rulers who embodied both martial prowess and spiritual authority. Others argue that the iconography matches later medieval styles, implying that the relief was added by later desert tribes to reinforce the city's mythical allure. This discrepancy fuels heated debate among epigraphers. Was the relief original, or a medieval interpolation? Historians are still debating this question. Emerging finally into a vaulted gallery, torchlight reveals carved niches once filled with oil lamps and maybe statues. Fragments of alabaster lie on the floor, hinting at high craftsmanship. Much speculation surrounds these artifacts. Some propose they were votive offerings, others that they once held sacred scrolls. Bedouin storytellers maintain that only the initiated could interpret the hidden scripts. It's a rare fact that some still claim to understand fragments of Zerzurian language through dream visions, a practice viewed skeptically by mainstream linguists but kept alive within certain desert clans. Above the gallery, a horizontal shaft admits a sliver of pale dawn. Golden light pours in, illuminating the far wall. A massive stone door carved with concentric rings and stylized waves. Rumor says this is the true gate of the river, leading finally to the oasis garden beyond. No mechanism is visible, no iron hinges or bars, leading some historians to propose that an ancient hydraulic system used water pressure to open the door from inside. Ingenious water-powered locks are documented in Hellenistic engineering texts, but no direct evidence has ever been recovered from this site. The mystery remains unsolved, and technical specialists continue to debate whether such a mechanism could have functioned in the desert environment. A low hum vibrates through the floor as the shaft's light fades. The party pauses, listening. Some swear they hear faint chanting, choruses of voices singing in harmony, too rhythmic to be wind. That sensation might be explained by acoustics. Vaulted stone chambers can create standing waves that amplify even a whisper into an eerie resonance. Acoustic archaeologists have studied such phenomena at ancient Jewish mikvehs and Greek amphitheaters, but no field studies have been done here. Whether the chant was once part of Zerzurian temple rites, or merely the desert playing tricks, remains an open question. Turning back toward the entrance, the passage that led deeper now appears shockingly small, a reminder that tunnels often change shape with perspective. Loose rocks shift underfoot, and it takes careful navigation to retrace the path without losing the carved symbols. Ancient guideposts, triangular indentations at eye level, fade in and out of view, as if daring you to forget the way home. One misstep, and travelers risk becoming trapped in an unlit section, where legends warn the jinn roam freely. Reaching the fresh air outside feels like waking from a dream. Blinking under the high sun, the group emerges on a barren ledge overlooking an expanse of dunes so vast they seem to pulse with silent life. Behind, the cliff face shows no sign of that concealed doorway. No hint of a secret entrance is visible from the plateau above. Bedouin tradition holds that the gate can vanish or reappear according to the will of the desert, ensuring only the worthy ever find it twice. As the morning heat intensifies, reflections of the underground salt crystals dance on the sandstone, creating mirage-like patterns that mimic rippling water. It's a final reminder that the desert and its hidden gateways exist in a fragile balance of perception and reality. Tales of these passages have inspired explorers for centuries. Moonlight weaves silver filigree across shattered columns, illuminating a vast courtyard where silence hangs like a shroud. Flickers of wind disturb the dust, revealing glimpses of carved reliefs that whisper of grandeur lost to time. A lone granite sphinx crouches half-buried near the far wall, its features worn smooth by centuries of sandstorms yet still guarding secrets in an inscrutable gaze. Somewhere beyond the ruins, the desert stretches untamed, ready to reclaim every slab of marble, every fallen capital. Stepping cautiously over fractured flagstones, you trace the outline of an octagonal column that still bears the faint imprint of acanthus leaves. Corinthian designs such as these first appeared across North Africa during the Hellenistic period, after Alexander's generals spread Greek artisans from Alexandria to Cyrene. Some art historians argue that local stoneworkers adapted imported motifs, forging a distinctive Saharan variant of Corinthian capitals. Others insist the craftsmen were foreign mercenaries hired by wealthy desert princes. Historians are still debating which scenario best explains the unexpected presence of Corinthian columns deep in the Sahara. Fragments of colored glass and marble tesserae scatter like fallen stars across the courtyard floor. Obscure texts mention a private mosaic workshop where artisans fashioned portable panels, tiny constellations of blue, green, and white glass intended to mirror the night sky. Unlike the grand mosaics of Roman villas, these panels were mounted on wooden frames to adorn private chambers. Few outside specialist circles know of this practice. It appears only in a passing note by a 10th-century Andalusian scholar who claimed to have seen Zerzura's most exquisite star mosaic in a traveling merchant's caravan. Passing through an arched portal, you enter a vaulted hall where niches line the walls. Oil lamp brackets cling to carved recesses, and a soft echo amplifies every footstep into a gentle chant. Acoustic engineers note that vaulted spaces can create standing waves that multiply sound, yet this chamber's design seems too deliberate for mere happenstance. Some scholars propose it served as a tribunal hall where oracles pronounced judgments. Others suggest it functioned as an administrative court for resolving caravan disputes. Historians are still debating whether this space was sacred, civic, or both. Beyond the hall lies a raised dais of polished limestone. Remnants of black onyx flank its steps, once the base of an imposing throne. Lotus and papyrus motifs swirl around the dais's edge, reflecting Egyptian influences that permeated the region after the Ptolemaic kingdom expanded southward in the 3rd century BCE. Mainstream archaeologists connect these plant symbols to pharaonic iconography of rebirth and divine kingship. Alternative theories contend that local rulers co-opted Egyptian imagery to legitimize their own authority. That duality continues to spark spirited debate among Egyptologists and Saharan specialists alike. A low corridor off the dais leads to a small chamber where walls gleam with embedded quartz fragments. Candlelight would have refracted off these minerals, casting a pearly glow across the stonework. This obscure technique appears unique to Zerzura. No other North African site shows similar quartz inlay. Geological surveys confirm the presence of quartz-rich veins nearby, but no quarry tools matching those used here have been found. Some believe the palace architects imported specialized artisans to execute this effect, while others argue the inlay served practical purposes, helping illumine the chamber on moonlit nights. Historians are still debating the true function of quartz decoration. In the northern wing, a narrow room holds low benches carved from dark basalt. Smudges of red ochre along the walls hint at pigments used to annotate administrative texts. Papyrus fragments discovered by early explorers mention grain rations allocated to palace workers and tribute levied on trans-Saharan caravans. Economic historians argue these records reflect a centralized bureaucratic state, while ritual specialists suggest the tallies also held religious significance, tithes offered to desert deities. Historians are still debating whether the inscriptions served purely secular or sacred ends. A lancet window frames the dawn sky, and a courtyard beyond reveals palm stumps scattered like sentinels around an overgrown basin. According to botanical treatises from medieval Timbuktu, Zerzura once cultivated a unique palm cultivar known as the desert sun palm. Its fruit reputedly retained moisture longer than common dates, sustaining travelers on long journeys. Modern genetic studies on surviving palm groves hint at rare drought-resistant strains in isolated oases, but no direct lineage has been confirmed. That botanical enigma fuels ongoing research into ancient desert agriculture. Descending a water-carved staircase, you enter a purification basin where channels once channeled spring water into shallow pools. Cleansed in these pools, devotees prepared for rituals of renewal. Similar ablution basins appear in Egyptian temple complexes and Mesopotamian ziggurats, but this design blends precise Hellenistic engineering with Bedouin water wisdom. Archaeologists debate whether Zerzurian rituals derived from Eastern influences or emerged independently, blending local groundwater management with foreign liturgical practices. Historians are still debating the cultural origin of these purification rites. In a small side chamber, footprints are etched into thick marble tiles, some human, others camel. Bedouin legends claim pilgrims carved their passage as a vow of safe passage through Zerzura's trials. No parallel practice exists in other Saharan pilgrimage traditions, making it an enigmatic ritual footprint. Cultural anthropologists argue the carvings served as practical trail markers, whereas folklorists view them as ceremonial. Historians are still debating the meaning behind the etched footprints. Corridors narrow to half-lit halls where shafts of opalescent light filter through cracks above. Patterns of shifting luminosity dance across dusty friezes depicting hunters spearing antelopes and musicians strumming tambourines. Virtual reconstructions attempt to simulate this immersive interplay of natural light and stone relief, yet none capture the full effect. Experiential archaeologists maintain that only in situ observation can reveal how ambient desert light activated these friezes, creating scenes that seem to move like living paintings. Turning a final corner, a grand audience chamber lies in ruins. Semicircular benches face a central dais carved with spiral motifs. Above, faded inscriptions in a half-Arabic script intermingle with unfamiliar glyphs, an early Creole writing system perhaps intended to safeguard state secrets from foreign scribes. Linguists disagree on whether the glyphs encode a distinct Zerzurian language or serve as symbolic cipher. Historians are still debating the origin and purpose of this cryptic script. A narrow annex reveals vestiges of a treasury. Alcoves lined with metal hooks once secured chests of gold and precious stones. Iron latch fragments and copper nails remain, hinting at sophisticated security measures. Byzantine records mention treasure houses of white stone in southern deserts, possibly an echo of Zerzura's opulent vaults. Yet no contemporary Byzantine map pinpoints such structures, leaving historians to speculate on whether such accounts refer to Zerzura or another lost city. Historians are still debating these cross-cultural treasure narratives. Not far from the treasury, a collapsed library chamber spills dusty scroll fragments across the floor. Papyrus bits show Greek, Coptic, and an unknown script, suggesting Zerzura was a crossroads of languages. Some scholars propose the library housed translations of philosophical texts from Alexandria. Others argue it stored local lore and Bedouin poetry. That uncertainty underscores how Zerzura may have bridged or confined knowledge. Historians are still debating the library's true holdings. In the western wing, a small shrine hosts a stone basin carved with concentric waves. Ritual oil burners once stood here, their residue still clinging to stone alcoves. Priests likely invoked blessings upon travelers before caravan departures. Similar shrines appear in desert sanctuaries across Arabia, yet this particular basin's wave design has no parallel, suggesting a uniquely Zerzurian symbol of water's spiritual power. Historians are still debating the significance of the wave motif. Throughout the palace, hardy lichens cling to shaded stone, and desert geckos dart between crevices. These resilient lifeforms thrive in the microclimate of subterranean corridors, providing a faint echo of the oasis that once flourished beyond the gates. Biologists study these adaptations, seeking clues about how flora and fauna endured extreme desert environments. Some propose that Zerzura's builders cultivated symbiotic relationships with such species, integrating living elements into architectural design. Historians are still debating the interplay of biology and architecture in Zerzurian planning. Leaving the palace courtyard, fading moonlight and rising dawn mingles, painting the sand in hues of rose and gold. Each shattered column, each shard of tile, resonates with echoes of palace life long vanished. The wind carries a final clatter of loose stones, as if the ruins sigh in remembrance. A line of laden camels stretches into the dawn haze, each hump silhouetted against blood-orange dunes. Silent figures drape corsewell cloaks around their shoulders, moving with deliberate slowness as they fasten leather straps and adjust the yawning packs. A low murmur of voices carries on the breeze, bartering tongues weaving together Arabic, Tamahak, and fragments of Greek. At the caravan's head, a tall lead camel towers above the rest, its handler murmuring encouragement as he checks each knot and knothole. The scent of camel sweat mingles with crushed cumin and frankincense wafting from woven baskets. Soon, the desert road will unfold mile after merciless mile, and the promise of Zerzura's treasure hangs on every whispered rumor traded among these travelers. Settling into the caravan's rhythm, you find yourself stepping at the pace of camel hooves sinking into warm sand. Between each hump, sturdy iron pots clink and rattle. Bundles of dried goat meat hang from wooden saddles. Some merchants bear goods from across the Sahara, gold dust from Tagaza salt mines, cola nuts from the forested south, dyed textiles from Africa. Others carry fragile jars of olive oil sealed with beeswax, destined for the markets of Kano and Gao. All share a single obsession: the fabled city of Zerzura, said to glitter with marble, water, and palm. Mainstream accounts credit trans-Saharan caravans with linking sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean from the 8th to 14th centuries, fueling commerce in gold and salt and shaping empires on both sides of the desert. Murmur deals flit through the group like playful foxes. One trader, draped in saffron-dyed robes, haggles over the price of ebony tusks carved into amulets. Another examines lapis lazuli beads rumored to aid clear dreaming, perhaps useful for navigating desert illusions. Merchants swap stories of distant oases, their voices dropping to conspiratorial hush whenever Zerzura's name surfaces. A veteran guide warns, better to carry salt than hope, a proverb meant to tether expectations to reality. Historians are still debating this question. Did caravans ever divert expeditions toward a phantom city? Or was Zerzura simply a metaphor that kept merchants vigilant against bandits and jinn? Midday sun beats down as you pause at an ancient way station, a cluster of stone ruins half buried in sand. Between two crumbling walls, a shallow cistern holds scant water, its surface crusted with salt. A handful of travelers squat nearby, scooping sips from ceramic bowls painted with geometric patterns. Those bowls bear the hallmark of Idrisid workshops in Fez, suggesting trade links that span the breadth of North Africa. Obscure fragments of contemporary documentation hint that some way stations offered covert passage for adventurers seeking uncharted routes. Maps inked in secret ciphers only legible by certain desert clans. Few outside those circles know how to read such maps, and those who claim mastery are often met with wary glances. Shifting sands conceal as much as they reveal. Tiny footprints, human, fox, desert hare, dot the wind-swept flats, hinting at passage but concealing intent. Buried halfway into the loose surface rests a slender wooden staff topped with an iron crescent, perhaps a traveler's guide marker. Bedouin custom sometimes saw devout pilgrims place such markers at the edge of once thriving wells to guide fellow seekers. Over centuries, many of those wells have vanished beneath a rolling sea of dunes. Scientific surveys using ground-penetrating radar have detected buried depressions in similar areas, but none conclusively match descriptions of a verdant valley signposted by metal crescents. As heat ripples across the caravan's line, a sudden disturbance sends dust swirling. A rider emerges from a hidden hollow, bearing a scroll tied with tan leather. Candle-dripped wax seals it, and his eyes gleam with urgency. Whispers spread that this scroll contains updated coordinates, an arcane set of bearings reputedly derived from a whispered melody, the so-called oasis song. Musicians in the caravan demonstrate how a single flute-like note corresponds to dunes and ridges, a mnemonic device for guiding the caravan under starlight. Such melodic mapping stands as one of the desert's most ingenious navigational tricks, blending oral tradition with landscape memory. Few outsiders even know this method exists. The caravan grinds onward, the scent of dust and mint tea drifting around midday camps. Each halt involves ritual, setting out straw mats, applying goatskin water bags to parched throats, and opening woven baskets of barley cakes and dried dates. Date palm cultivars like the Tunis Ridge, prized for their longevity without irrigation, appear among the rations, an obscure variety believed to have originated along an ancient caravan route rather than in major oases. Some scholars argue this cultivar's genetics link back to 9th century oasis farms near Sijilmasa. Others hold those tales are romantic fabrications meant to enhance the mystique of desert diets. Nightfall brings relief. Lanterns cast dancing shadows across face veils as travelers huddle beneath broad canopies. Music rises, a gentle plucking of oud strings, the soft beat of a tambourine, lullabies in low, lilting Arabic. Camels kneel in unison, tucking their legs under bulky bodies, and handlers drape blankets over roasting coals. Under a canopy of a million stars, the caravan transforms into a floating oasis of warmth and song. One obscure custom involves passing a roasted locust skewer around the circle, considered both a delicacy and a symbol of desert resilience. Few modern travelers dare it, but locals swear by its protein-rich properties. Dreams in the caravan often conjure mirages of verdant palaces and dancing water. Between staccato snores, a lone whisper of Zerzura drifts through the tents, a soft prayer or a curse. Dawn arrives with a symphony of dromedaries shifting and handlers humming rice husk prayers. Camel milk, foaming and warm, offers the morning's first revitalization, served in hollowed gourds carved from calabash. Camel milk contains higher vitamin C than cows, a quirky nutritional fact long valued by desert nomads but seldom noted in Mediterranean diet treatises. Broken pottery shards glint like scattered stars under a midday sun as the caravan cautiously moves around a collapsed fortress. Walls of mud brick and baked clay still bear faint Somali inscriptions praising Allah and an unknown king, possibly indicating a Sabaean connection. Some archaeologists suggest early Zerzurian pilgrims stopped here before venturing deeper into the dunes, leaving votive prayers on plastered walls. Yet skeptics point out that similar structures exist hundreds of miles apart, making it hard to tie any one ruin directly to Zerzura's trade network. Historians are still debating this question. A chilly wind picks up at the edge of a wide salt flat, and riders tighten leather wraps around their wrists. Flint blades glint as they break ground to set up fire pits for gnawed mutton. Commanding a higher vantage, the lead guide scans dune lines with horn-rimmed eyes. He leans toward you, softly reminding that routes shift each season. What lay open a year ago may now be buried to mid-thigh by migrating sands. That knowledge once required intricate oral charts passed from father to son, a lineage dwindling as nomadic lifestyles encounter settled towns. Mid-journey crises often hinge on water. The caravans had to dip into every reserve. Leather bladders, communal wells, even collecting dew in linen cloth at dawn. A forgotten Bedouin trick has handlers tying cloth across camel flanks. As morning breeze passes through, it traps condensation, which is then squeezed into small sheepskin pouches. Few testimonies remain of how reliably this dew harvesting works. Most scholarly treatises ignore it as superstition, yet locals swear by its occasional miracle. Historians are still debating whether such dew techniques ever sustained large caravans. Rumors passed in hushed tones say that some caravans found narrow ribbon-like gullies leading away from the main route toward a gleaming oasis. Those gullies, hidden behind dune walls, sometimes channeled underground streams from distant mountains. A single misguided descent could plunge a party into sinkholes or quicksand, hazards so deadly they earned the name Sand Blood Gulch. Bedouin songs memorialize those lost souls, weaving grief and caution into haunting melodies. Few travelers learn the verses fully. Masters of the art claim each lyric encodes critical survival tips. By late afternoon, the caravan halts beneath a jagged rock outcrop. Shields of shade cling to the limestone face, offering a cool retreat. Handlers spread thick goat hides on the packed earth and pass clay cups filled with barley porridge sweetened by date syrup. Conversations pivot to tales of Zerzura's glittering domes, gleaming like polished alabaster beneath a sky of lapis lazuli blue. Those tales trace back to the 10th century historian al-Masudi, who wrote of an oasis blindingly white at noon. Debates rage over whether al-Masudi conflated multiple accounts or faithfully recorded an eyewitness report. Historians are still debating this question. As dusk under the first pale light of dawn, a solitary figure kneels before a statue carved from dark stone, its form half swallowed by drifting sand. This black sphinx, unlike the ivory-hued guardians of Giza, bears a glossy sheen, its surface reflecting the morning glow like a polished mirror. Scarcely a whisper escapes the sands around it. Yet legends insist that the Sphinx speaks in carved prophecy to anyone daring enough to approach. Whether these prophecies were meant to protect Zerzura's sanctity or lure unwary travelers into a desert snare remains a question etched in both stone and rumor. Ancient cultures across North Africa adopted the Sphinx motif from pharaonic Egypt, where it symbolized royal power and divine guardianship. Greek historians like Herodotus described the Egyptian Sphinx as a sentinel bearing riddles, an image later echoed in Hellenistic art across the Mediterranean. By the Roman period, sphinxes appeared on sarcophagi and decorative friezes, blending protective symbolism with funerary iconography. This mainstream historical lineage suggests that Zerzura's builders drew on well-established motifs, perhaps seeking to legitimize their own rulers through association with powerful empires. Historians are still debating whether the Sphinx in desert isolation served a defensive purpose or a purely ceremonial one. Forged from a rare volcanic glass, obsidian imported from as far as the Ethiopian highlands, the Black Sphinx stands apart from any other known Saharan monument. Obsidian use in antiquity generally appears in highland workshops for crafting blades and mirrors, yet its appearance here poses questions about ancient trade networks. Obscure Bedouin tales claim that caravans bearing obsidian passed through Zerzura, bartering volcanic glass for oasis dates and salt. Few scholars have documented these trans-desert obsidian routes, making the statue's material one of archaeology's most puzzling mysteries. Beneath the Sphinx's paws, a block of smooth basalt bears shallow grooves filled with fading ochre pigment. In these lines, a prophecy is inscribed in jagged angular script, a solemn warning that water claims the unworthy and crowns the brave. Early translations by 19th-century explorers rendered the text unevenly, some reading blood instead of water, a discrepancy that has led to multiple contested editions of the prophecy. Linguists note that the carving's vernacular echoes Old Arabic mixed with echoes of a lost desert dialect, hinting at a linguistic crossroads where nomadic tongues met scriptural forms. Historians are still debating this question. Ancient merchants spoke of caravan leaders gathering around the Sphinx at twilight, offering handfuls of date seeds to its granite paws. They hoped the gesture would invoke blessings, yet some claim that the Sphinx's eyes glowed scarlet whenever a dishonest trader approached. One obscure chronicle, attributed to a Hermetic sage, records a merchant who read the prophecy aloud and immediately found his waterskins dry, as though the statue had cursed him. Such accounts blur the lines between physical reality and supernatural consequence. Carved glyphs show faint indentations of sandals and palm prints where seekers knelt, tracing each symbol as if unlocking a hidden code. Epigraphers debate whether these glyphs served as mnemonic devices for guiding rituals, or as warnings to the uninitiated. Mainstream scholarship recognizes similar mnemonic carvings in pharaonic temple forecourts, where priests used symbols to recall complex chants. Yet the desert context here is unlike any temple precinct, suggesting that these markings represent a uniquely Zerzurian adaptation of ancient practices. Historians are still debating the original purpose of the carved glyphs. Hidden on the Sphinx's flanks are inscriptions in cuneiform, a script most often found on clay tablets from Mesopotamia. The presence of these wedge-shaped signs, alongside Arabic-like characters, implies that scholars and traders of disparate cultures once converged here. Cuneiform, dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE, was largely obsolete by the time Arab conquests swept the region, making its appearance at Zerzura utterly confounding. Some theorists propose that refugee scribes preserved archaic writing traditions, while others suggest the script was adopted for its secrecy, legible only to an elite few. Ritual offerings left at the Sphinx's base include shards of alabaster bowls and droplets of incense resin. Observations by early 20th century explorers noted traces of frankincense and myrrh on the statue's paws, spices imported through Red Sea ports. Ritual specialists argue that these offerings mirror practices recorded in South Arabian temple sites, where votive deposits honored protective deities. Yet the Black Sphinx, solitary in the shifting dunes, seems to stand apart from any known temple axis, raising questions about how its cult-like rituals were organized and maintained. A worn pathway of compacted sand leads around the statue to a narrow alcove carved into the rock face. There, niches once housed oil lamps and ceremonial urns. Similar rock-cut sanctuaries exist at Petra in Jordan, where Nabatean architects carved elaborate facades into sandstone cliffs. The design parallels suggest knowledge exchange between desert polities, perhaps through merchant caravans that carried both goods and ideas. However, no inscription explicitly names any external architect or patron, leaving the statue's origin shrouded in anonymity. Legends persist that on nights when the moon is blood-red, the Sphinx's eyes weep tears of black resin that solidify into small droplets. Folk healers collected these Sphinx tears, attributing to them powerful medicinal properties, believed to cure blindness and bring prophetic dreams. No chemical analysis of the resin exists, making this practice an obscure footnote in ethnobotanical records. Botanists remain skeptical, suggesting that the black droplets could be fossilized plant pitch rather than magic. Historians are still debating whether the resin ever possessed any genuine curative effect. Dating the prophecy's carving presents further challenges. Traces of soot embedded in the statue's grooves have yielded inconsistent radiocarbon dates, some placing the carving in the 5th century CE, others centuries later. Radiocarbon specialists note that soot from oil lamps can migrate through porous stone, skewing results. Mainstream archaeological methods favor stratigraphic analysis of associated deposits, yet no intact layer surrounds the Sphinx's base. Sand shifts continually with every windstorm, erasing context. Historians are still debating which dating technique provides the most reliable timeline. Whispered Bedouin tales claim that on windless nights, a faint voice resonates from within the statue, reciting the prophecy's verses in echoing cadence. Some ancient travelers swore they recorded the voice on clay phonograph cylinders, odd relics later lost to time. Ethnomusicologists recognize similar echo phenomena in cave acoustics, where certain frequencies can create vocal illusions. Whether these auditory mirages originated from natural resonance or were deliberately engineered by Zerzurian priests remains unresolved. Historians are still debating the Sphinx's phantom voice. At dawn's end, when the sun's rays glaze the black stone with a fiery halo, the Sphinx seems to come alive. Its engraved features leap into sharp relief, and the prophecy's words appear to dance across the basalt. Caravans that pass here treat the moment as a divine sign, either a blessing for safe passage or a dire omen warning of hidden dangers ahead. The prophecy's ambiguity, blessing and curse intertwined, echoes the dual nature of desert life itself, where hope and peril ride side by side on every dune. Shadows lengthen as the statue recedes behind the caravan's final ripple of riders, yet its presence remains imprinted in memory. The Black Sphinx's prophecy continues to challenge all who encounter. Lantern light dances across brittle papyrus fragments strewn atop a low, sand-covered stone table, each piece inscribed with looping hieroglyphs and angular script. Faded ink bleeds into fibers weakened by centuries, yet patterns of palm fronds and crescent moons remain discernible. As the desert night settles around this hidden chamber, dust motes swirl in the beam, lending the scrolls an almost ethereal glow. Shadows shift on the rough-hewn walls, and every breath stirs memories of Zerzura's vanished dynasty. A hush descends as a wizened scribe, wrapped in faded indigo robes, approaches the table. His fingers, calloused from years of handling fragile texts, hover above the largest scroll. With deliberate care, he lifts it, revealing a cluster of tiny holes, worm tracks that attest to the document's antiquity. The script is a melding of old Arabic characters and pictographic signs never seen elsewhere. Mainstream papyrologists note that such hybrid scripts emerged in frontier trading towns during the 6th century CE, when scribes adapted Greek and Coptic notations to transcribe local dialects. Yet no known corpus matches the particular symbols here, prompting debate over whether Zerzura's scribes developed a wholly unique orthography. Historians are still debating whether this script represents a transitional writing system or an isolated linguistic experiment. A second chamber, stacked with rolled scrolls tied by sinew, holds texts of varying sizes. Some measure barely 6 inches long. Others extend 5 feet, their ends curled into tight spirals. Mercenary guides warn that unrolling them fully risks irreversible damage. Papyrus layers can flake away at the slightest tremor. Yet curiosity overtakes caution. One scroll unfurls, revealing a chart of water flows and date palm plantings, overlaid with tiny stars marking festival dates. Scholars argue this may be an agricultural calendar, but one obscure footnote mentions a Night of 7 Lanterns, a ceremony unknown in any other desert culture. Debate rages. Was that festival unique to Zerzura, or merely a poetic flourish by a bored scribe? Historians are still debating the festival's true nature. Careful conservation demands gentle moisture in a sealed enclosure, but the chamber's air remains arid. A trickle of sweat forms at the scribe's temple as he reads an edict decreeing an annual tribute from passing caravans. A portion of frankincense, a handful of myrrh, and a single lotus oil flask. Arab merchants of the 9th century recorded similar tithes in North African oases, but none specify a city named Zerzura. That discrepancy fuels academic dispute. Perhaps Zerzura was a poetic appellation, not a formal settlement. Yet Bedouin lore insists the scrolls list actual levies collected at a checkpost carved from living rock. Historians are still debating whether the tribute edict refers to a real taxation scheme or symbolic homage. By the next torch's glow, another fragment reveals a letter addressed to Queen Sarah, praising her justice and wisdom. A rare feminine ruler inscription, such as this, evokes parallels with the Candate queens of Nubia, who ruled in their own right during the Meroitic period. Gender roles in early Saharan societies remain understudied, but some obscure Ethiopian chronicles mention powerful desert queens whose names have long since vanished. Could Zerzura have been matriarchal, or does the title queen merely denote a priestess-king? Historians are still debating the political structure implied by the scrolls. A rolled bundle tied with gilded thread contains what appears to be a border treaty, with maps crudely drawn in charcoal. Shifting lines trace dunes and oases, while symbols, triangles for wells, circles for palm groves, anchor the treaty's terms. 2 neighboring desert tribes affix seals. One bears a stylized falcon, the other a geometric sunburst. Both seals appear in other scattered artifacts from Wadi Rai and Fezan, suggesting trade and political alliances extended across hundreds of miles. This surprising evidence challenges assumptions that Zerzura was isolated. Instead, it reveals a nexus of diplomacy and commerce. Some scholars argue these alliances indicate a robust state apparatus, while others suspect later interpolations to legitimize modern Bedouin claims. Historians are still debating the scroll's authenticity and provenance. At the chamber's rear, a narrow slit admits a shaft of moonlight that falls upon a single scroll laid lengthwise on a stone bench. Its edges are charred, suggesting exposure to fire. The scribe unrolls it cautiously, revealing a narrative poem that chronicles the founding of Zerzura by a legendary figure named Amr ibn Malik. Lines describe how he followed a fever dream to a verdant valley, guided by stars that breathed silver. Astronomical references align with the heliacal rising of Sirius, a phenomenon well documented by Ptolemaic astronomers. Whether the poem is historical or allegorical is contested. Classicists view it as myth-making, while literary anthropologists argue it encodes genuine oral traditions. Historians are still debating the poem's historical reliability. Near the scrolls, shards of ink pots, once glazed ceramic vessels, lie scattered. Analysis of residual pigments reveals traces of indigo and safflower dyes, expensive materials imported from India and Yemen. That trade in writing supplies underscores the city's wealth and far-reaching connections. In one corner, a small notebook of palimpsest parchment shows earlier Coptic texts scraped away to make room for desert chronicles. Palimpsests are common in monastic libraries of Egypt, but their presence here implies scribes repurposed every bit of writing material, perhaps due to papyrus scarcity or cultural reverence for ancient texts. Historians are still debating whether the practice reflects economic necessity or symbolic homage to bygone scribal traditions. Momentary silence gives way to the sound of small stones tumbling as the chamber roof shifts, an ominous reminder that the very space is fragile. Faded murals on the walls depict scribes seated at low benches, inhaling the smoke of incense as they inscribe texts by lamplight. One mural shows a king holding a scroll aloft, as if proclaiming divine sanction. Artistic styles resemble late antique manuscript illuminations, yet executed in coarse desert pigments. A lone art historian speculates this could represent one of the earliest illustrated codices, a predecessor to medieval gospel books. That suggestion remains fringe but tantalizes researchers searching for the roots of illustrated manuscripts. Historians are still debating whether Zerzura pioneered such artistic conventions. A small carved niche contains a sealed clay jar, its lid stamped with a circular emblem of entwined palm leaves. Inside, sealed by beeswax, are flecks of gold dust and an unrolled papyrus fragment reading, "In the year of the green palm." Dating regnal years by unique city symbols was uncommon outside Egypt's pharaonic dynasties. Could Zerzura have labeled years by local iconography? Some think the phrase denotes a ceremonial era based on agricultural cycles rather than solar years. Chronologists are divided on whether to align this calendrical system with Julian, Coptic, or wholly separate reckoning. Historians are still debating the chronology implied by Year of the Green Palm. A draft of a legal code lies beside the jar, listing offenses like water theft, caravan ambush, and desecration of sacred groves. Punishments range from fines in silver dirhams to forced labor in irrigation works. Legal historians note similarities to Andalusian Maliki jurisprudence, which codified desert water rights in the 9th century CE. Yet certain clauses, such as capital punishment for defacing palm trunks, appear nowhere else in Islamic legal texts. That anomaly suggests a localized set of customs sanctioned by city rulers. Historians are still debating whether the code represents genuine law or a traveler's embellished notes. Taking a final piece from the table, the scribe reveals a fragment of illuminated text bound by silk threads dyed red. Its faded gold leaf still glimmers under torchlight, forming the opening of a ceremonial invocation. "O Spirit of hidden waters, guide our steps." Invocation formulas like this echo Coptic liturgies and Nabatean water cults. Yet here they are inscribed in a unique blend of languages, Arabic, Aramaic, and an unknown tongue. Such prayers suggest syncretic religious practices that fused Christian, Jewish, and indigenous desert beliefs into a local mystery cult. Scholars of comparative religion debate whether the cult was exclusive to Zerzura's elite or practiced openly by commoners. Historians are still debating the cult's structure and membership. As dawn's light seeps into the chamber, the scrolls retreat into darkness once more. Each fragment carries weight. Administrative decrees, diplomatic treaties, founding myths, devotional invocations, all woven into a portrait of a city as complex as any Mediterranean metropolis. Yet none provide definitive proof of Zerzura's precise location or the fate of its people. The desert sands have claimed every trace of libraries. Dust-laden winds whip across the dunes, sculpting the landscape in ghostly waves that shift beneath a burning sun. By midday, the air thickens with fine particles, and the horizon blurs into an undulating mirage of ochre and brass. From a distance, a towering wall of sand, like a living mountain, forms without warning, its crest crowned with whipping spines of grain. Travelers speak of such storms as the desert's breath, a powerful reminder that nothing stays fixed for long. In Zerzura's tales, these sandstorms carry memory itself, burying palaces one night and revealing column fragments the next. Ancient lore insists that the city's courtyard could vanish overnight. One Bedouin legend describes a grand plaza with marble colonnades that, by dawn, lay buried under 40 feet of shifting sand. Caravan guards told how scarce survivors stumbled upon only the tips of Corinthian capitals protruding like shipwreck masts above the dunes. Oral testimonies passed through generations warn that a single storm can redraw the map. Wells close, palm groves disappear, and hidden chambers resurface, their entrances suddenly exposed by swirling grit. Historians are still debating this question. whether these stories reflect actual meteorological events or serve as metaphors for the impermanence of human endeavor. Meteorological science offers insight into these phenomena. Wind regimes in the central Sahara combine trade winds from the northeast and occasional southerly harmattan flows, creating turbulent shear zones. When these winds converge, they lift fine sand in towering plumes that travel hundreds of kilometers. Modern measurements record gusts exceeding 100 kilometers per hour, capable of moving vast quantities of sediment in hours. Geologists call the resulting formations ergstorms, and satellite imagery today can track them in near real time. Yet in Zerzura's era, unprotected metal or painted surfaces could be sandblasted smooth in minutes, and loosely stacked stones dismantled by the abrasive force. Hidden within the shifting sands are rare microbial communities known as hypolithic bacteria, discovered only in the late 20th century. These extremophiles colonize the underside of quartz pebbles, thriving in the microclimate created by light diffusion through stone. In Zerzura's context, such bacteria may have colored exposed stone surfaces with vibrant hues, red, orange, or green, visible fleetingly before the next storm scoured them away. Few researchers encounter these colonies, and their role in preserving or eroding ruins remains obscure. Historians are still debating whether ancient builders noticed and exploited these natural pigment sources in decorative work. Standing on the rim of a dune, the sound of grinding sand resembles distant thunder. As the storm advances, visibility drops to less than a meter. The relentless roar fills ears, and breathing becomes an effort against razor-sharp grit. Bedouin guides once used palm trunk screens set at angles to break the wind's force, creating temporary windbreaks where tents could be pitched. Archaeological surveys of remote oases sometimes uncover charcoal-blackened wooden slats buried beneath sand layers, evidence of ancient camps fortified against these savage storms. This survival strategy appears in no major architectural treatise, existing only in the memory of desert clans. Historical accounts from medieval travelers lend credence to these Bedouin warnings. In the Rila, Ibn Battuta recounts crossing an expanse he called the Shifting Sea, where relentless wind buried one caravan and spared another by mere dune contours. His narrative describes how he awoke to find a single camel's hoof visible above a flat, silted plain, its companions entombed in sand. Modern translation of his manuscripts reveals scribal additions that conflate separate incidents, sparking debate over whether the Rila's dune burial episode refers to a real event or a composite moral tale. Historians are still debating this question, weighing eyewitness reliability against oral tradition's propensity for embellishment. In contemporary fieldwork, dune migration rates on large Barkhan formations can exceed 20 meters per year. When superimposed on Zerzura's supposed coordinates, these dunes could have swept entire sections of the city within a human lifetime. Geomorphologists employ ground-penetrating radar to detect buried stone foundations, linear signatures contrasting sharply with natural sediment layering. Such surveys in the Libyan desert have revealed platforms and walls lying just beneath the surface, vestiges of ancient settlements. None, however, have been conclusively tied to Zerzura. Debate persists. Did Zerzura occupy a shifting dune field doomed to constant burial, or was it nestled in a more stable depression less prone to the desert's whims? A dramatic first-person account by an 18th-century French explorer, Jacques de la Motte, describes a sudden gale that swept through his camp at twilight, whipping sand into a 5-meter crest that erased all traces of his tents. At dawn, he claimed, the dune had collapsed to reveal a marble pillar etched with an unknown script, an extraordinary detail never confirmed by later visitors. His journal, preserved in an obscure Parisian archive, mentions fragments of red and green mosaic visible at the storm's exposure site. Critics argue that de la Motte conflated memories of differing expeditions or succumbed to exhaustion-induced hallucination. Historians are still debating whether his written testimony holds factual weight or represents romanticized fiction. In the wake of a particularly violent storm, a ridge of dunes can overtop ancient escarpments, spilling onto lower terraces where hidden cisterns once held water. Bedouin folklore speaks of dune avalanches, a phenomenon where a steep face collapses under its own weight, sending a wave of sand cascading over any obstacles. Geotechnical studies confirm that certain steep dune faces, when saturated by rare desert rains, become unstable and slump. These events can unearth stone thresholds, doorways, and fill subterranean chambers with fresh sediment, all within a single night. Such rapid transformation underscores how little remains constant in desert archaeology. A recently uncovered column base, found half-buried at the dune's foot, bore chisel marks matching samples from known Zerzurian palaces. Radiocarbon dating of tiny organic inclusions in the mortar placed its construction in the 3rd century CE. Cultural heritage teams noted that the wind-blown patina on the stone suggested periodic exposure and burial episodes spanning centuries. Whether this fragment came from Zerzura itself or a nearby satellite settlement remains contested. Historians are still debating this question. Some argue for a network of related desert towns, while others insist on a singular legendary city. In quieter moments, long after the storm's roar has faded, ratcheting sounds echo across firmed sand surfaces. Granular creep as the dunes settle into new alignments. At night, these settling grains can produce eerie murmurs, like whispered conversation among the dunes. Local storytellers claim these noises are the voices of lost laborers buried beneath the waves of sand, forever restlessly walking. Geophysicists call the phenomenon singing sands, attributing it to friction among uniform grains within a narrow size range. This acoustic curiosity appears in only a handful of desert locations worldwide, including parts of the Libyan Erg. Its presence around Zerzura's ruins adds a spectral quality to the shifting sands. During one expedition, a researcher noted that storm-blown sand created a natural cement when mixed with dew or scant moisture, hardening into a thin crust upon exposure. Over centuries, such crusts can form protective layers over ruins, shielding them from subsequent erosion. Counterintuitively, some sandstorms may partially preserve stonework rather than erode it. Field studies in the Algerian desert recorded sandstone blocks under intermittent crusts showing less damage than continuously exposed surfaces. This paradoxical preservation method has scarcely been documented outside professional geology journals. Historians are still debating whether ancient Zerzurian architects understood and exploited this natural process in their building techniques. You walk among the dunes after dawn, tracing half-buried steps that vanish just beyond reach. The shifting sands whisper beneath your boots, each grain a tiny historian recording centuries of transformation. Here, a corner of patterned tile. There, a weathered capital. At times, a wind-sculpted ridge forms a natural arch over a buried doorway, suggesting entrances to subterranean chambers long lost. Photographers from earlier centuries captured charcoal sketches of such arches, though no photographs survive. Those images persist only in faded ledgers and the memories of local clans. An unexpected calm follows a storm's fury, and the desert takes on an otherworldly stillness. A hush blankets the dune sea, broken only by the distant drip of dew settling on cold rock. In that silence, every buried ruin seems to pulse with possibility, a hidden world beneath shifting sands awaiting rediscovery. Yet each storm threatens to bury it again, consigning discovery to the next wind cycle. It is this cycle of revelation and concealment that gives Zerzura its enduring mystique. Lanterns flicker across the camp as dusk deepens, and a hush settles over the dunes. In that moment, a lone flute note drifts through the air, soft, quivering, as if carried on a sigh. Nomadic tents huddle around a central fire, their ochre fabrics glowing warmly against the encroaching night. In the distance, the wind whispers against taut camel-hair walls, harmonizing with the lone musician's melody. This is the beginning of the nomad's nocturnes, a secret festival sung beneath a canopy of stars, where each note holds a story older than any caravan route. A hush ripples through the listeners when the second note emerges, rich and low, produced by a double-reed instrument known locally as the mizmar. Similar instruments appear across North Africa in medieval manuscripts, often tied to Sufi devotional gatherings where music eased the soul's journey toward union with the divine. Mainstream historians trace the mizmar's lineage to the ancient Egyptian oboe like al-Zuangna, noting its presence in 9th century Andalusian poetry as a staple of desert hospitality. Yet few texts describe its use beyond courtly settings, making its central role in nomadic night rites one of the Sahara's hidden symphonies. Embers shift in the fire pit, sending sparks twisting upward like fireflies. Beneath the flicker, faces gather. Women in flowing veils, men in hooded cloaks, children perched on woven mats. A darbuka drum enters the tapestry, its deep pulse echoing the heartbeat of the earth itself. In scholarly circles, debate continues over whether the darbuka evolved from the Byzantine turnable or was independently developed by desert tribes. Historians are still debating this question. Despite the lack of consensus, the darbuka's resonant timbre remains integral to the nocturne's rhythm, guiding dancers who sway in unison under the crescent moon. Between each rhythmic flourish, an oud player joins in, plucking delicate arpeggios that entwine around the flute's lament. The oud's pear-shaped body and almond silk strings reflect a lineage stretching back to Sasanian courts and perhaps earlier, to Parthian bards who strummed lutes amid caravan camps. Mainstream academics agree that the oud migrated westward through trade routes, evolving into the European lute by the Renaissance. Yet an obscure Bedouin tradition claims that Zerzura's nomads modified the instrument's sound holes to mimic the rustle of palm fronds, hoping to evoke the lost oasis in every note. A soft chant rises as the percussion pauses, voices blending Arabic salawat with whispered verses in a dialect unrecorded by grammarians. Linguists have discovered hints of this dialect in graffiti at remote wells, isolated words carved into stone that hint at a poetic form now all but extinct. Those inscriptions mention silver palms and wings of night, echoing the nocturne's themes. Few outside that region recognize the dialect's grammar, and no complete text survives. Historians are still debating whether such inscriptions reflect genuine linguistic diversity or later poetic embellishments. A slender reed flute, its end flared like a budding blossom, emerges among the instruments. Crafted from the stalk of an endemic reed, found only in isolated desert wadis, it produces haunting overtones that seem to drift between worlds. Ethnomusicologists first documented this wadi reed in the 1970s, noting its rare timbre, a breathy, ethereal sound that fades into silence like the last star before dawn. Though modern field guides mention the reed's existence, few scholars have studied its manufacturing techniques, leaving behind the faint outline of a single melody recorded on a battered cassette tape. As the music weaves through the night, dancers rise in a slow procession, their movements mimicking caravan rhythms. Forward, backward, sway, and rest. The steps mirror the undulating dunes, a kinesthetic homage to the landscape that shapes their lives. Anthropologists studying nomadic rituals describe this as a kinetic map, with each gesture marking a direction, a memory, a prayer for safe passage across shifting sands. Obscure ethnographies note variations in footwork between clans. Some stamp in double time to ward off evil jinn. Others trace spirals to honor ancestral winds. The fire's glow intensifies, illuminating painted faces adorned with white ochre crescents above each eye. These markings, scholars agree, derive from pre-Islamic desert rites, where ochre represented both purity and protection. Few texts detail the exact patterns, but Bedouin women insist that the crescents align with specific constellations, perhaps the palm cluster, that myth says leads faithful travelers to hidden springs. Whether the practice stems from religion or superstition remains contested, but its endurance underscores the nocturne's blend of belief and artistry. Suddenly, a low drone joins the ensemble. A bull roarer spun overhead, creating a deep roar that resonates through the ribcages of onlookers. Archaeologists have uncovered similar bull roarers in Bronze Age European sites and Pacific Island contexts. Yet their presence here speaks to convergent invention or ancient diffusion across continents. Uncovering a functioning bull roarer in a desert ruin challenged preconceptions. Either nomads regained knowledge of the device independently, or it arrived millennia ago via long-forgotten trade. Historians are still debating this question. A moment of silence follows, and a single drummer taps an irregular pattern on a leather-stretched goat hide, an archaic signal known as the moon's whisper. Recorded once in a 12th-century Andalusian traveler's diary, the pattern was said to call desert spirits to dance. Critics call the diary's author prone to fanciful tales, yet local performance preserves the pattern unchanged, suggesting at least some historical core underpinning the ritual. Ethnomusicologists puzzle over how such a rhythm survived intact across centuries and miles. Soft laughter ripples through the circle as another musician unveils a zinc tambourine hammered from old caravan shackles. The instrument's jingles create a bubbly backdrop, and its metal quality evokes the resonance of distant rocky canyons. In medieval copper mining oases, smiths apprenticed in metallurgy sometimes repurposed scrap metal into percussion, forming the earliest tambourines. Few historians note these origins, overshadowed by later European references. Yet the desert's role in metallic instrument innovation deserves recognition. Night deepens and the winds soften, leaving only a gentle sigh through the encampment. A female vocalist begins an impromptu lay, her voice rich with vibrato that bends every vowel into a lament. Verse speaks of moonlit caravans, broken flints, and lost lovers left waiting by oasis pools. Scholars compare the style to the Andalusian muwashsha, though the nomadic rendition extends syllables and alternates between minor and Phrygian modes, an uncommon fusion. Whether this reflects direct musical inheritance or parallel evolution remains disputed, but the result is achingly beautiful. Between verses, the scent of burning resin drifts from a clay censer, myrrh mixed with local frankincense and crushed desert thyme. Apothecaries in the medieval Islamic world prized such blends for warding off illness. Modern chemical analysis identifies antiseptic compounds in the thyme. Obscure medical treatises from the 14th century reference desert thyme's antimicrobial properties, though most textbooks overlook those marginal notes. In the nocturne's context, the incense serves both ritual and practical purposes, cleansing the air and lifting spirits. Under a vault of stars, nomadic elders recount tales between songs. One story speaks of a Sufi mystic who, after hours of music and prayer, slipped into a trance and awoke with a map inscribed on his palms, showing labyrinthine tunnels leading to Zerzura's hidden gateways. That account survives only in an anonymous 15th century manuscript, its authenticity long questioned. Historians are still debating whether the mystic's trance map represents genuine memory or mystical allegory designed to guide spiritual seekers. The circle pulses with renewed energy as the reed flute returns, its trills weaving between low droning notes of the bull roar. Dancers improvise around the fire, stamping out patterns that echo the constellation-driven choreography of ancient desert cults. One clan performs a move called Palm's Embrace, in which dancers hug an imaginary trunk, signifying gratitude for water. Ethnographers suggest this gesture confers communal blessing, akin to Christian processions circling holy relics. The practice's origins remain murky, with scant mention in historical chronicles. A hush falls as the silver blade of the moon arcs overhead. Silence holds for a single breath, then erupts in a crescendo of every instrument and voice. The resulting wall of sound carries across the dunes, where it fades into a distant echo that seems to linger longer than acoustics would allow. Travelers claim to hear the echo for hours, guiding them back to camp should they stray. Acoustic specialists note that desert topography can create surprising reverberations, but none match the sustained resonance described in local lore. Historians are still debating this acoustic phenomenon. Drums retreat and the mizmar exhalations. Night unfurls overhead like a vast tapestry stitched with pinpricks of light. You lie on a woven mat of goat hair, the scent of burning resin still lingering in the air, and tilt your head back to drink in the heavens. Each star seems to pulse with ancient secrets, and among them the so-called silver star, a bright gem in the southern sky that locals call Najm al-Fida, the star of the silver oasis. Legends insist that when this star reaches its zenith, its gleam points the way to Zerzura's hidden entrance, shimmering through shifting dunes like a silvery thread. Generations of Bedouin astronomers have mapped the desert sky by memory alone. Under the 9th century rulings of the Abbasid Caliphate, scholars translated Ptolemy's Almagest into Arabic, preserving Greek star names and introducing new catalogues. In the ensuing centuries, figures like Abd al-Rahman al-Sufi refined those charts, identifying nebulous patches such as the Andromeda Galaxy, misty to the naked eye and deemed little clouds. While those mainstream developments shaped Islamic astronomy, desert nomads adapted that knowledge for survival. By tracking the rising and setting of key constellations, They learned to estimate seasonal shifts, timing caravan departures and avoiding deadly heat waves. The silver star itself is commonly identified with the star Deneb in the Cygnus constellation, its pale hue and high altitude marking midsummer nights. Bedouin star lore, however, speaks of a smaller cluster adjacent to Deneb known as the Palm Cluster, whose 5 main stars mimic the shape of date palm fronds. Ancient manuscripts recovered from Fezon describe this cluster as a celestial compass. When its orientation shifts, one must adjust course by a half-circle on the ground to stay true. Modern astrophysicists recognize this palm cluster as an asterism woven from stars in both Cygnus and Lyra, yet no formal designation exists in Western star charts. Obscure treatises claim the cluster stars exhibit subtle color changes over long periods, an unverified phenomenon that would mesmerize any skywatcher. Cupping your hands behind your head, you recall hearing that Arab navigator Ahmad ibn Majid once sailed by sighting a similar cluster above the Indian Ocean. His 15th century logbook mentions a silver bow used to steer dhows across open water. Bedouin guides maintain that the same star map guided desert caravans across the Sahara's dune seas. Whether Ibn Majid's silver bow and Zerzura's palm cluster are one and the same remains unclear. Historians are still debating this question. Amid the silent swirl of darkness, you spot a faint trail of glowing streaks, a meteor shower radiating from the constellation of Pegasus. Remarkable accounts from the 11th century record a rain of fire that fell upon southern oases, leaving small metallic nuggets scattered in wadis. These fragments, later identified as chondritic meteorites, are thought to have inspired myths of skies weeping silver among the Bedouin. Geochemists in the modern era have dated one such specimen to around 1022 CE, matching medieval observations. Yet widespread documentation by desert cultures is sparse, making the exact timing and cultural impact of those meteor falls an obscure footnote in celestial history. Voices of guides drift nearby as they consult ink-blotted parchments under a flickering lantern. Star charts, drawn on parchment reinforced with goat hide, depict the silver star skies in intricate detail. Lines join bright stars to form horses, falcons, and curving palms, each figure carrying directional meaning. One archaic glyph marks the gate arrow, an arrowhead shape composed of 3 stars that, when aligned vertically over the silver star, is said to reveal the aperture into Zerzura's mountain lair. Attempts to cross-reference these maps with al-Sufi's Book of Fixed Stars have yielded only partial matches, as medieval copyists sometimes conflated different traditions. Historians are still debating whether those Bedouin charts derive directly from scholarly works or represent an independent astral tradition. Statistics woven into the margins list precise angles for nighttime navigation. When Najm al-Fida stands 18 palms high, face southwest and walk 9,000 paces. That practical astronomic measure, a palm equating to the width of an outstretched hand, mirrors the ancient Egyptian use of the cubit. Eurasian travelers like Marco Polo mention similar units in 13th century accounts, yet equating Chinese or Persian measures with Bedouin palms leads to confusion. Metrologists debate whether these palm-based instructions stem from a standard across caravans or reflect localized adaptation. Historians are still debating the origins of these measurement systems. A soft breeze rustles the dunes, and constellations shift imperceptibly as the Earth turns. The Big Dipper, known here as the Camel's Hump, rides low over the northern horizon, signaling that winter approaches. In midwinter, when the silver star dips below the horizon altogether, rumor says the oasis gates vanish until the next rising, an annual cycle of concealment and revelation. Bedouin proverbs warn, "Seek the silver star when the camel sleeps. Lose it, and you wander till the camel weeps." The allusion to camels sleeping at midday, an odd image, actually references the dew-collected moisture on blankets, marking dew points essential for predicting sudden night chill. Meteorologists rarely cite this, but local survivalists swear by it. Rustling from the guidebook, an elder points out a second constellation, the desert scorpion, whose tail aligns with the silver star's reflection on certain nights. This scorpion is clearly Scorpius in Western astronomy, but its Bedouin outline stretches farther east, incorporating stars that astronomers know belong to Sagittarius. This expansion of the traditional constellation demonstrates how cultures redraw the sky to mirror their own geography. While Ptolemaic charts list 51 official constellations, Islamic star mappers integrated new patterns, among them the Yemen falcon and Persian lion. The desert scorpion's extended form may owe more to oral tradition than rigorous observation. Historians are still debating its provenance. High above, the Milky Way slashes across the sky in a swath of pale luminescence, its myriad stars too faint to count by eye but forming a visible river of light. To Bedouin watchers, this river is Sayf al-Jannah, the sword of paradise, pointing the faithful towards spiritual refuge. Sufi poets in Andalusia likened the Milky Way to a path for souls, and the analogy spread across Arab lands. Mainstream scholarship acknowledges these poetic uses but seldom examines how desert nomads incorporated such metaphors into navigation. Ethnoastronomers argue that the sod of Sufi mysticism directly informed Bedouin star names, blending faith and function in desert skygazing. A sudden hush envelopes the group as a shooting star arcs gracefully across the zenith. Tradition holds that catching sight of a shooting star while tracing the palm cluster grants a momentary glimpse of Zerzura's glaze-covered walls. Some travelers insist they've seen walls rise like a mirage, only to vanish when the star's tail fades. Skeptics attribute these visions to the mind's eye at the threshold of sleep and dehydration. Ethnologists note that the phenomenon of hypnagogic hallucination intensifies under extreme conditions. Historians are still debating whether such accounts record physical phenomena or dream state illusions. Fainter still, a rare planetary alignment comes into view. Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn form a diagonal line high in the western sky. Astronomical calculations show that such triple conjunctions occur only once every several decades. One record, dated 1176 CE in a Yemeni gazetteer, mentions caravans halting to observe this alignment, believing it auspicious for finding hidden waters. Scientific reconstructions confirm the conjunction indeed occurred in April of that year, yet no contemporaneous Saharan report mentions it by name. That absence provokes questions about the extent of astronomical literacy among desert travelers. Historians are still debating the cultural reach of planetary observations. Embodied in these celestial patterns is more than navigational data. It is a storybook written in light. Orion's belt, the Three Sisters, once guided a caravan along a low-lying pass near the Tibesti Mountains. A fragmentary rock carving there depicts three figures under a triple star. Epigraphers differ on dating. Some favor the 3rd century BCE, others the 7th century CE. The ambiguity underscores how little we truly know about when such star stories entered desert lore. Historians are still debating the timeline of these asterisms. In the flicker of moonlight, you trace the contours of the silver star on the map laid before you. Each guide's finger traces different lines, as though no two versions of the sky chart are identical. That fluidity reflects a living tradition. Stars are constant, but their stories adapt with every telling. As the camp settles into quiet reverence, a final instruction echoes. When Najm al-Fida stands at the moon's eye, turn north by northeast and walk until dawn's first glow. Whether that path leads to Zerzura or deeper into oblivion depends on faith, skill, and perhaps a touch of desert magic. Dawn's pale light filters through a narrow fissure in the cliff face, illuminating a half-sunken entrance carved from pale limestone. Steps hewn into the rock descend into cool darkness, and the air carries a faint scent of damp moss and mineral-rich moisture. Flickering torchlight reveals walls polished smooth by centuries of flowing water, and at each turn, carved reliefs depict lotus blossoms and stylized waves. Ancient guardians, stone lion-headed figures with bodies of serpents, peer silently from their niches, their eyes worn but still fierce. A distant drip echoes from the depths, each drop the heartbeat of a temple long lost to the world above. Gripping the rough-hewn handrail, you follow a descending corridor whose walls widen to reveal a vaulted chamber. Channels carved into the floor once guided water from an underground spring into a central basin. A series of 4 smaller pools ring this basin, each connected by carefully measured sluices, an engineering marvel reminiscent of Persian canot systems that date back over 2 millennia. Mainstream archaeological studies credit such water management techniques to a diffusion of Persian and Mesopotamian expertise, suggesting that Zerzura's founders adapted foreign designs to desert conditions. Historians are still debating whether this subterranean network was constructed by itinerant engineers or by local innovators who learned through trial and error. At the chamber's heart, water laps against a mosaic floor of turquoise and white tiles, forming patterns that resemble rippling waves. A rare sight in desert contexts, this mosaic incorporates tesserae fashioned from crushed seashells imported from the Red Sea, an obscure detail mentioned only in a single 12th century traveler's note. According to that account, craftsmen believed crushed shell imbued water with purity, both physically and spiritually. Modern geologists have confirmed tiny fragments of aragonite and calcite in samples taken from similar oases, but none match the quality found in the Lost Water Temple. Historians are still debating how Zerzurian artisans acquired and processed such marine materials so far inland. Narrow alcoves branch off the main hall, each containing carved reliefs of priests pouring water from amphorae into smaller vials. One relief shows a priest wearing a mask depicting a fish, perhaps symbolizing life emerging from darkness. Obscure zoological texts record a blind cave fish species, Phretichthys andreutzi, living in desert aquifers, but none have been positively identified in the Sahara. The relief's fish head could refer to an extinct local species or serve purely as a metaphor for life restored. Scholars disagree about whether the imagery describes real creatures or is purely symbolic. Mainstream interpretations lean toward metaphor, while a few eco-archaeologists argue for a lost endemic fish. Pushing past another carved door, the corridor slopes gently downward, and the air grows humid. Small stalactites of calcium carbonate cling to the ceiling, and occasional trickles of water form miniature pools along the walls. A faint blue luminescence seems to emanate from the wet surfaces, an effect later studied by 19th century explorers who dubbed it subterranean moonlight. Modern chemists attribute this glow to bioluminescent algae or mineral fluorescence under low light, but no one has sampled these exact sands to confirm. Historians are still debating whether the ancients recognized this glow and incorporated it into ritual practice. Deep within the temple lies a circular chamber whose walls curve inward to form a shallow dome. At its center stands a carved altar of black basalt, ringed by narrow channels that once carried water to 7 small basins. An inscription above, half erased by damp, reads in an archaic mix of Old Arabic and unknown symbols. Let water cleanse the body, mind, and spirit. Epigraphers note that similar threefold purification motifs appear in Egyptian temple texts, yet the use of 7 basins aligns more closely with Mesopotamian purification rites. Historians are still debating whether this ritual combined traditions from multiple cultures or evolved independently in Zerzura. A low bench cut from a single slab of limestone encircles the chamber, its surface pockmarked by centuries of dripping water. Here, pilgrims once sat to perform ritual ablutions, washing hands, feet, and faces before advancing deeper. Archaeobotanists studying residue on comparable benches in Persian water shrines have discovered traces of myrtle, frankincense, and rose petals, symbols of purity and healing. A solitary 14th century Zerzurian poem mentions roses fallen upon sacred stones, hinting at similar practices, but no physical residue remains to be sampled. Historians are still debating whether Zerzurian rites included aromatic botanicals or were strictly utilitarian. Leaving the domed chamber, the passage narrows toward a smaller grotto where the spring source bubbles up from a fissure in the bedrock. Clear water pours through a carved spout into a stone trough studded with tiny channels leading to hidden reservoirs. An ancient engineer's mark, a small compass-like engraving, still lies faintly inscribed beside the spout. Mainstream historians link this precision carving to Hellenistic surveying techniques, suggesting that Greco-Egyptian surveyors may have influenced temple design. Alternative theories propose that local priests developed their own geodetic tools shaped by practical necessity. Historians are still debating the origins of these engineering marks. Tiny fish dart beneath the spout, perhaps juveniles carried in by visiting birds or introduced deliberately as temple guardians. A medieval herbalist's manuscript, found in Andalusia, briefly notes fish in desert springs and claims their presence signified divine blessing. Modern ichthyologists have documented desert spring fish in a handful of oases, but have yet to identify any population matching the tiny mosaic-depicted fish. That paucity of evidence fuels debate. Was the fish relief an idealized creature or a record of an actual species long since vanished? Historians are still debating the reality behind the imagery. Around a bend, a side niche houses a stone basin carved with concentric circles, an ancient nilometer-like gauge for monitoring rising water levels. Similar instruments appear on the island of Elephantine and in medieval Cairo, but this gauge's markings use a unique measurement unit, segments shaped like date palm leaflets. Metrologists have tried to convert those units to known cubits or palms but arrive at inconsistent results. Some argue Zerzurian leaflets measured roughly 2 handspans. Others insist they corresponded to fractions of a cubit. Historians are still debating the temple's system of measurement. Passing beneath a low lintel, you enter a vaulted sanctuary where dozens of small niches once held oil lamps or incense burners. Blackened traces on the stone suggest repeated illumination, and a faint odor of cedar resin lingers still. Worshippers may have circled this room 7 times, exhaling fragrant smoke to honor the temple's water spirit. Obscure liturgical texts reference 7 breaths for the 7 springs, but no complete ritual manual survives. Comparative religion scholars note parallels with Gnostic baptismal rites, where multiple immersions signified layers of spiritual cleansing. Historians are still debating the ritual's precise structure. A final antechamber contains what appears to be a burial shrine, a raised dais carved with lotus motifs and flanked by 2 stone lions. On the dais, a rectangular well opens to view, its lip worn smooth by centuries of leaning pilgrims. According to Bedouin oral tradition, a revered priest was interred here, his body laid within a sealed chamber below the spring. Such burials align with ancient Egyptian practice of associating priests with deities after death, yet no mummified remains have been discovered. Geneticists have proposed using environmental DNA sampling to detect ancient human traces, but no such expedition has yet been mounted. Historians are still debating whether any tomb truly lies beneath. A soft breeze stirs as daylight seeps into the entrance corridor. Dust motes whirl in the warmth, and the steady drip of water resumes its steady cadence. Carrying a small amphora, you bottle a sample from the spring, cool, slightly mineral-tinged, with a hint of sweetness. Analytical chemists examining desert spring waters have noted that high silica content can impart a mild sweetness, but no modern report describes water as fresh as this. Some local legends claim drinking from the lost water temple confers visions. Skeptics attribute such visions to placebo and the mind's thirst-induced illusions. Historians are still debating the spring's reputed powers. Retracing the carved steps back toward the daylight, every drip and echo lingers in memory. The temple's stonework, water channels, and ritual spaces speak of a society that revered water as both practical sustenance and sacred gift. While all surface trails have vanished beneath drifting dunes, this subterranean sanctuary persists, a hidden heart pulsing with life's essence. Departing the temple, torchlight dims and the wind's warmth greets you once more. Yet the lost water temple remains alive in your thoughts, its gentle murmurs guiding every step under the sprawling desert sky. Sunlight filters through a dense canopy of feathery fronds, casting dancing patterns on the sandy floor of the sacred palm grove. Ancient trunks rise like cathedral columns, their fibrous bark etched with glyphs and knots that mark the passage of countless seasons. A heady aroma of ripe dates mingles with faint wafts of desert sage, and the hush of the grove feels sacred, as if each leaf holds a whispered prayer. Beneath a sky of bleached blue, clusters of golden fruit hang heavy, poised to drop with a soft thud onto woven mats laid by watchful keepers. Every sense comes alive in this verdant sanctuary tucked deep within barren dunes. Archaeobotanical evidence places date palm cultivation in Mesopotamia over 5,000 years ago, yet Zerzura's grove claims its own origin story. Seeds smuggled in hollowed canes by early desert pioneers fleeing arid mountain valleys. Pollen cores retrieved from ancient lake beds near the oasis show phoenix dactylifer grains dating to the late 1st millennium BCE, confirming mainstream theories of northward palm migration. However, genetic analyses reveal unexpected diversity among oasis palms. a hint that a secondary domestication event might have occurred here, independent of Mesopotamian prototypes. Historians are still debating which scenario best explains the grove's unique lineage. A lesser-known variant reputedly grew here, the silver thicket palm. Its young fronds silver-green rather than emerald, reflecting moonlight with an otherworldly sheen. A 10th-century Andalusian traveler recorded tasting pale blush dates said to soothe fevered skin when crushed into poultices. Modern botanists debate whether that cultivar ever existed or was a fleeting mutation lost to time. Occasional seeds sold in modern bazaars claim silver thicket heritage, but rigorous DNA testing has yet to validate their provenance. Historians are still debating whether this palm was myth or mutation. Labyrinthine pathways wind between the palms, worn smooth by generations of ritual footfalls. Clerics leading purification rites would sprinkle scented water drawn from the lost water temple at each grove junction, consecrating the soil before newcomers passed through. These purification circuits echo Egyptian temple gardens, yet Zerzura's design emphasizes circular procession over axial symmetry. Archaeologists note that Hellenistic gardens favored straight avenues, while this oasis grove embraced curves, perhaps reflecting desert nomads' reverence for cyclical time. Historians are still debating whether the circular layout predates Hellenistic influence or emerged from indigenous sensibilities. At select palms, carvings of hooded figures clutching torch staffs appear at knee height, and small niches once held clay lamps. Local legend credits these lanterns with guiding night-bound seekers safely through the grove's shadows. Few texts describe nocturnal ceremonies here, but Bedouin elders recall the midnight offering, when scented oils were poured into stone bowls under the new moon. A handful of basins bear traces of ancient resin, likely frankincense mixed with crushed date seeds. Historians are still debating whether these rites served practical purposes, warding off desert beasts, or purely spiritual ones, invoking blessings for travelers. A raised platform of flagstone sits amid the tallest palms, an open-air pulpit from which priest-kings addressed assembled pilgrims. Lotus and papyrus motifs carved into the stone connect the grove to Nile Valley iconography, where palms symbolized fertility and rebirth. Mainstream scholarship credits Egyptian motifs' diffusion across the Sahara via trade routes, yet an alternative theory posits that local dynasts adopted palm symbolism independently, inspired by native spring legends. Historians are still debating the grove's symbolic genealogy. Halfway through, a slender streamlet emerges from a carved basin, trickling along a channel lined with mosaic shards. This irrigation channel linked directly to the lost water temple's subterranean aquifers, delivering vital moisture to roots and worshippers alike. Techniques mirrored Persian qanat systems, yet Zerzurian channels featured small falcon wing weirs, delicate carvings regulating flow with poetic elegance. Scholars debate whether these weirs were artistic embellishments or represented a sophisticated hydraulic innovation now lost. Historians are still debating their original function. Woven fringes of palm fiber drape between trunks like ceremonial banners, bearing cryptic symbols. These palm fiber weavings were a desert craft, producing sturdy ropes and mats. One fragment discovered in an overturned caravan chest illustrates a gazelle in mid-leap, an homage to local wildlife. Some believe the fringe panels served as nocturnal guides, their patterns luminescent under moonlight. Others view them as offerings to grove guardians. Historians are still debating their ceremonial role. As dusk falls, the grove takes on an ethereal glow. Lanterns hung from low branches cast amber pools of light, and wind-stirred fronds produce a hushed murmur known as the palm's whisper, a natural acoustic phenomenon where tightly spaced trunks channel sound. Acoustic archaeologists have studied similar effects in forested sanctuaries, but desert palm groves remain largely unexamined. Some assert Zerzura's priests intentionally planted palms to harness this wind-borne music. Skeptics argue it was a happy accident. Historians are still debating the grove's acoustic design. Near the grove's heart stands the grand palm, its trunk more than twice the diameter of the surrounding trees and crowned with the broadest fronds. A local myth tells of a sage whose staff sprouted this behemoth in a single night, symbolizing hope's triumph over desolation. A 12th century Moroccan poet praised the grand palm as Zerzura's soul, swaying in eternal prayer. Whether the tale encodes an actual founding miracle or emerged as poetic legend is unclear. Historians are still debating the palm's true origins. When dawn's first rays slant through the fronds, golden speckles illuminate shallow etchings on the sandstone floor, a relief map marking the grove's sacred paths. Pilgrims traced these carvings with sandals, confirming correct routes in the dim. Similar floor maps appear in medieval caravanserais, yet none match the intricate detail here. Measurements correspond precisely to compass bearings, blending navigational aid with devotional preparation. Historians are still debating whether floor maps functioned as practical guides or symbolic markers of spiritual journey. Clusters of gypsum crystals nestle at the palm's bases, their white luster stark against dark humus. Naturalists note that gypsum accumulates where water evaporates repeatedly, hinting at ancient overflow from irrigation channels. A rare microclimate forms beneath the closed canopy, sustaining small ferns and moss patches unseen elsewhere in the Sahara. Biologists speculate that Zerzura's gardeners may have encouraged these growths, harvesting moss for bedding or medicinal poultices. Historians are still debating whether the grove's greenery was entirely artificial or partly wild. In one secluded glade, a semicircle of low basalt benches surrounds a fallen palm frond altar. Pilgrims left offerings of pounded dates and aromatic herbs here, seeking visions of the hidden gateways. An obscure travel diary from the 13th century notes a spontaneous trance induced by inhaling crushed desert sage beneath moonlight. Modern pharmacologists identify thujone compounds in the sage that can produce mild hallucinogenic effects, yet no chemical analysis of ancient residue exists. Historians are still debating whether groves' rituals incorporated entheogens or relied solely on symbolism. High overhead, a single papyrus mala, a string of beads carved from palm seeds, hangs from a branch like an offering. Each bead bears a rune-like mark, representing prayers for annual rains. Papyrus beadwork appears in Coptic Christian contexts as rosaries, yet this mala's design uses a repeating pattern of 7, evoking numerological significance in Islamic tradition. Scholars are still debating whether the mala bridges Christian and Islamic devotional practices or stands as a wholly local invention. A hidden pool lies at the grove's eastern edge, its surface cloaked by lily pads and overhung by drooping fronds. A block of basalt carved into a low bench invites ritual bathing at sunrise. Footprints in the wet clay suggest that centuries of pilgrims knelt here to sip water and chant prayers to the oasis spirit. While early desert shrines featured similar baptismal pools, no other oasis boasts a covered lily pond. Its presence here remains an enigma. Historians are still debating whether the pond was natural or engineered by Zerzurian priests. Beneath one grove entrance, the sand reveals a series of small, triangular anchors, mortises for once upright palmwood beams, likely forming a temporary canopy for shade or feasts. Travelers' journals from the 14th century mention tent pavilions under silver palms, yet archaeological proof is scant. Timber rarely survives desert sands, but faint imprints in hardened sediment confirm the beam's alignment. Historians are still debating whether these beam anchors supported permanent structures or seasonal gathering halls. A final stretch through the grove leads to an elevated terrace paved with limestone slabs. Here, date presses once stood. Hollowed rock basins. Sunrise paints the horizon with molten gold as slender silhouettes of desert falcons perch on tanned leather stands, their sharp eyes scanning the shifting dunes like living compasses. A soft breeze stirs their feathers, and the bare rock ledge beneath them feels warm to the touch despite the early hour. Falconers gather in a semicircle, their weathered hands steady as they check intricate jesses and hoods dyed with saffron and pomegranate pulp. This is the dawn of the desert falcon rituals, rites thought to honor Zerzura's ancestral sky guardians and ensure safe passage through the shifting sands. In this land of extremes, falconry extends beyond sport. It represents a sacred bond between human and raptor. Nomadic tribes across the Sahara practice the art for millennia, relying on trained birds to hunt partridges, gazelles young, and desert hares. Archaeological evidence places the origins of falconry in Mesopotamia around the 2nd millennium BCE, where Sumerian carvings depict kings releasing hawks over reed beds. By the time Arab tribes adopted the practice, It had evolved into both practical subsistence hunting and ceremonial pageantry. Mainstream historians recognize falconry as a UNESCO-designated intangible cultural heritage of humanity in many Arab states, underscoring its enduring cultural importance. Leather hoods, known here as burqa/gar, serve to calm young falcons during transport. These hoods bear tiny engraved symbols, glyphs of sunbursts, stylized dunes, and a single palm frond that echoes the sacred palm grove. Obscure Bedouin lore holds that these engravings were taught by a blind falcon master, who once guided rulers to Zerzura's hidden gates by touch alone. Few written records mention his name. Elders call him Urf the Silent, crediting him with translating wind and wing into a language of signs. Historians are still debating whether Urf existed as a historical figure or remains a phantom of oral tradition. When the first golden rays spill across the courtyard of palm-shaded stands, falcons are hooded in ceremonial silence. Offers of fresh water, drawn from the lost water temple's subterranean spring, are presented in shallow ceramic bowls. The water shimmers with faint traces of crushed date pollen, an additive believed to grant the birds renewed vigor after long nights aloft. Medieval Andalusian treatises on desert agriculture mention the practice of date water baths for hunters, hounds, and birds alike, crediting date pollen with mild antiseptic properties. Modern zoological studies confirm that pollen grains can coat feathers, reducing microbial growth, but whether Zerzurian falconers understood the scientific benefit or relied solely on tradition remains contested. An age-darkened leather glove is passed to the novice falconer, who slips a gauntlet hand beneath the hooded bird's chest. The bird ruffles its covert feathers, its talons clicking against the glove's steel studs. A silent prayer is murmured in archaic Old Arabic. By sky and sand, guide my steps. These invocations mirror formulas found in Coptic water spirit inscriptions, another sign of cross-cultural exchange that scholars continue to untangle. Some believe that the desert rituals predate Islamic influence, stemming from pagan desert spirit worship. Others argue they were codified into Islamic devotional contexts to ensure acceptance among pious tribes. Historians are still debating this syncretism. At the falconer's signal, the hood slips away. A rush of sound, heartbeats and startled wings, erupts as the bird launches into a spiraling ascent. Its flight pattern follows a revered shape called the Circle of the Falcon King, a wide spiral that narrows toward the center, mimicking the outline of Zerzura's hidden gates. A carved relief discovered in the Hidden Gateway's tunnels depicts a similar spiral, suggesting that falconry formed part of a larger symbolic map. Some authorities argue that these spirals encoded navigational cues. Others insist they served purely as ritual choreography. Historians are still debating this interpretation. The released falcon climbs higher, scanning the jagged horizon for movement. A signal drum, its leather surface taut as midday heat, beats a slow, resonant rhythm that echoes across the dunes. This drum pattern, known as the desert heart, synchronizes with the falcon's wing beats, a sort of sonic tether between hunter and prey. Ethnomusicologists have recorded this rhythm in only 2 other Saharan locales, suggesting a rare diffusion of musical falconry rituals. One obscure footnote in a 13th-century caravan ledger even equates the drum's pulse to the falcon's heart, hinting at an early form of biometric tracking, an idea that modern scholars find both intriguing and speculative. While the falcon ranges, handlers release live gazelle fawns tethered with long cords. The fawn's frightened leaps give the falcon targets for honing its strike. When the bird stoops, wings pulled tight, it seizes its quarry with scything talons before tumbling to the sand in a controlled breakfall. A hush follows, part awe at the bird's precision, part respect for life taken. Instead of a kill, a symbolic feathered offering may substitute on certain ceremonial days, ensuring no real prey is harmed. That practice recalls pre-Islamic desert taboos against unnecessary bloodshed, yet the existence of real hunts shows a pragmatic adaptation. Historians are still debating the balance between ritual protection and survival necessity in these rites. After the display, falcons are guided back to perches on slender stands crafted from date palm wood. These stands bear the name Forked Branch of Legacy and feature carved notches recording each bird's lineage. Obscure genealogical scrolls, once part of a royal stable archive, listed falcon broods with precise dates, often noting celestial events like meteor showers or lunar eclipses at the time of each hatch. Some modern falcon breeders in Andalusia trace their lines back to these rosters, though no surviving archive matches those ancient scrolls exactly. Historians are still debating the authenticity of these claimed lineages. Each falconer now performs a washing ritual, hands dipped into a silver basin, then shaken over palms to let droplets fall on each bird's crown. That silver basin, stamped with stylized falcon wings, appears in Byzantine inventories of southern caravan cities. Yet few mention its final destiny. Some explorers claim to see it displayed in a Cairo museum. Others insisted it vanished during Ottoman upheavals. Whether the basin ever traveled beyond the desert or remains buried in Zerzura sands is a matter of heated conjecture. As midday heat peaks, a small group repairs carved perches and stands in the shade, smoothing splintered wood and restringing leather loops. Blacksmiths fashion new jesses from camel hide, treating them with boiled horn and date oil polish so they flex without cracking. Artisan workshops once flourished near the hidden gateways, producing specialized falconry gear. Excavations in remote sites have uncovered tanned leather offcuts and reed-woven carrying nets, yet no comprehensive falconry workshop has been uncovered. Some believe that these artisans were itinerant, traveling with caravans. Others argue for permanent oasis-based guilds. Historians are still debating the organizational structure of Zerzura's falconry craftsmen. Late afternoon brings the Falconers' Council, convened beneath a cluster of ancient acacia trees. Elders seated on low stone benches present each bird for inspection. Wings spread, eyes bright. Ornithological notations are murmured. Flight feathers counted, body weight recorded, talon curvature measured. Such detailed records echo practices found in 17th century Ottoman falconry manuals. Yet the desert's harsh environment required adjustments. Weights calculated not in grams but in grain units, approximated by handfuls of millet. Scholars note this measurement system's scarcity in written sources, suggesting a largely oral transmission. Historians are still debating how numerical data persisted in nomadic cultures with limited literacy. As the sun dips, the falcons are hooded once more and carried on padded perches to the council stone, a circular dais carved with interlocking falcon silhouettes. Here, a ritual feast unfolds. Flatbreads soaked in date honey, goat's milk cheese, and pomegranate kernels mingled with toasted barley. Each falconer partakes in a small portion before offering crumbs to the birds, a sign of shared sustenance and mutual respect. That meal reflects Bedouin hospitality customs, where feeding guests first signified honor. Yet combining human and bird rations at a sacred site seems unique to these desert falcon rites. Historians are still debating the symbolism behind this shared feast. A final ceremony commences at dusk, a silent procession led by a lone falconer carrying a gilded hoop, through which each hooded bird must pass. Passing the hoop without falter symbolizes purity of lineage. Any bird that hesitates faces retraining during the next gibbous moon. That practice resembles medieval European hoop jousting games, but here the hoop is a test of avian temperament rather than human valor. Rare references in a 14th century Iberian manuscript hint that returning crusaders may have witnessed similar desert spectacles, but clear documentation remains elusive. Historians are still debating the hoop. A corridor of polished sandstone stretches ahead. Its walls shimmered with flecks of mica that catch torchlight and scatter golden sparks across every surface. The air tastes faintly metallic, as though traces of dust linger on the tongue. At the corridor's end, an ornate doorway carved from rose-hued limestone stands framed by bronze panels, each inlaid with thin sheets of beaten gold. A hush falls over the assembled seekers as the massive slab swings inward on hidden pivots, revealing the golden chamber in all its dazzling glory. Inside, walls coated with a thin layer of lime plaster gleam like molten sunlight. Embedded within the plaster, pulverized gold dust from Nubian mines creates an all-over iridescence that shifts with every flicker of flame. Mainstream restorers link this technique to Byzantine artisans working in Ravenna during the 6th century CE, who pioneered gold-ground mosaics in imperial basilicas. Historians are still debating whether Zerzura's craftsmen learned these methods directly from Mediterranean masters or arrived at them independently through trial and error. A vaulted ceiling arches overhead, its surface covered in interlocking hexagonal tiles of beaten copper gilt overlaid with gold leaf. Each hexagon bears a raised star motif, its center punctuated by a tiny garnet or carnelian set like a ruby ember. Obscure metallurgical treatises from medieval Cordoba reference a desert alloy that mixed native copper with trace amounts of alluvial gold, creating a malleable metal known only in caravans' secret inventories. Few modern scholars have examined surviving samples, leaving the precise composition an enduring mystery. Historians are still debating this alloy's origins and distribution. Subtle curvature in the walls bends reflected light into gentle waves, an effect sometimes called the liquid wall. Art historians note parallels with late Roman curved nave theaters, where concave surfaces enhanced acoustics and created optical illusions. In Zerzura's chamber, those same principles seem to have been applied to light itself. Torch flames flicker and dance as if alive, casting moving patterns that mimic water lapping against polished hulls. Experimental archaeologists have reconstructed small sections to test this effect, yet opinions diverge on whether the design was intentional or fortuitous. Historians are still debating the chamber's architectural purpose. Along the east wall stands a shallow basin carved from a single slab of onyx, its surface inlaid with veins of white calcite that resemble thin rivers of moonlight. When filled with water, the basin's surface reflects the golden walls in concentric ripples, creating the illusion of endless cascades of light. Such reflective basins appear in late antique Roman baths, used to cool and mesmerize patrons. Yet the choice of onyx, a stone imported through Egyptian ports, suggests Zerzura's builders spared no expense. Archaeologists have found onyx quarries in eastern deserts, but no records describe large-scale onyx trade to the Sahara. Historians are still debating the basin's provenance. In a secluded alcove, a series of mirrors angled against the walls focus beams of light onto a central dais. These polished bronze mirrors, each about a foot across, bear inscriptions in an archaic Greek script praising Apollo, the bringer of light. Greek geographer Strabo mentioned mirror-based fire-starting devices among desert nomads, though few believed such tales. Modern metallurgists have recreated similar mirrors by hammering copper alloys and burnishing them with fine sand, but none achieve the brilliance described in travelers' journals. Historians are still debating whether these mirrors were practical tools or purely decorative marvels. Carved stone pillars ring the chamber, their capitals sculpted into stylized lotus blossoms gilded with pure gold leaf. Between each pillar, narrow niches house alabaster lamps fed by olive oil drawn from distant Mediterranean groves. When ignited, the lamps cast a pale glow that refracts through the gold-plated niches, creating the effect of a starfield suspended in midair. Byzantine mosaics in Ravenna and Constantinople used similar lighting techniques in ecclesiastical settings, but here the effect feels less devotional and more theatrical. Historians are still debating whether Zerzura's chamber served a ceremonial role or entertained a more secular elite. Beneath the mosaic floor, a shallow network of channels once carried water infused with crushed chrysocolla, a copper-bearing mineral whose blue-green hue contrasted strongly with gold surfaces. Artisans in ancient Egypt used chrysocolla for jewelry and as a pigment, yet integrating it into hydraulic systems remains undocumented elsewhere. The combination of gold and blue-green water produced a visual effect scholars call the aqua aurea illusion, a surface that appears both liquid and metallic. Experimental reconstructions demonstrated the effect under controlled lighting, but desert conditions may have altered the chemistry over centuries. Historians are still debating how the water's color changed over time. A narrow staircase leads up to a balcony overlooking the chamber. From this vantage, wall panels appear to undulate like golden waves. Each panel consists of rows of overlapping gold scales hammered onto wooden backing, similar to lamellar armor used by late Roman cavalry. Obscure military treatises describe the technique for its reflective and protective qualities, but adapting armor technology for interior decoration remains a singular innovation. Historians are still debating whether the panels were repurposed war trophies or deliberately crafted for the chamber's aesthetic. At the balcony's edge, a small copper brazier emits fragrant smoke from burnt frankincense sourced through Red Sea trade routes. The smoke reacts with trace minerals in the plaster, causing tiny crystals to glint and refract light like prisms. Ancient perfumers wrote of smoke alchemy that altered scents when interacting with specific mineral surfaces, yet no recipe book survives. Modern chemists acknowledge that some resin-mineral combinations can produce photoluminescent effects under certain wavelengths, but testing such phenomena under desert conditions presents logistical challenges. Historians are still debating whether the effect was intentional or a byproduct. In each corner of the chamber, a black basalt obelisk rises, its surfaces inlaid with narrow bands of gold filigree. Obelisks in Egypt often served as solar monuments, capturing and reflecting sunlight at dawn's first rays. Here, these mini obelisks appear positioned to catch torchlight or ephemeral reflections from the onyx basin, redirecting illumination back into the center of the room. Some researchers propose the obelisk's placement corresponds to cardinal directions, forming a geometric light-trapping device. Historians are still debating whether these columns functioned as part of a ceremonial calendar or as purely decorative elements. A central dais carved from red porphyry stands at the room's heart, its edges lined with narrow channels that once held burning oil. When ignited, the oil's flames would reflect off the surrounding gold panels to create the impression of a living torch at the chamber's core. The use of porphyry, imperial stone imported from Egypt, underscores the chamber's exclusivity. Roman imperial palaces favored porphyry for sarcophagi and thrones, symbolizing power and permanence. Zerzura's adoption of this material suggests its rulers sought to invoke similar imperial grandeur. Historians are still debating whether the dais served as a throne platform or sacrificial altar. Atop the dais, intricate patterns of ivory and horn inlay form a geometric design that seems to shift as one moves around it. This optical effect, sometimes called trompe-l'oeil marquetry, appears in 16th century Ottoman furnishings, but Zerzura's artisans employed it centuries earlier. Experimental studies revealed that slight variations in inlay thickness and the use of subtly variegated materials contributed to the shifting illusions. Scholars debate whether the designers understood the neurovisual principles underlying the effect or achieved it by empirical trial. Historians are still debating the craftsman's level of technical knowledge. Along the chamber's west wall, a hidden niche contains a small cavity where a sundial once rested. The dial's gnomon cast a shadow that traced a path across gilt numerals, marking hours by light's progression. Ancient Greek sundials have been found across the Mediterranean, but their survival in an enclosed chamber defies logic, unless an angled shaft from the ceiling allowed a sliver of sunlight to penetrate at specific times. Observations recorded by an early 20th century explorer describe such a shaft aligned with the summer solstice, but no modern survey has confirmed its existence. Historians are still debating whether the chamber functioned as a solar observatory or purely as an artistic spectacle. Shadow play on the ceiling reveals hidden details, faint carvings of grapevines and pomegranate trees, their motif central to Near Eastern fertility symbolism. When torches flickered, the vines appeared to crawl across the ceiling like living vines. Similar vegetal motifs appear in Sasanian palaces, blended with Zoroastrian symbolism of life and renewal. Whether Zerzura's designers borrowed directly from Sasanian prototypes or developed parallel iconography through shared cultural exchange remains contested. Historians are still debating the origins of these motifs. In a small side chamber, a bench of polished alabaster contrasts starkly with the surrounding gilding. A vast sea of silver dunes unfolds beneath the moon's gentle glow, each ridge etched in pale light while shadows ripple across the sands like silent tides. Within this luminous expanse, familiar shapes emerge. The flattened outline of last night's campfires, the low silhouette of a distant rock outcrop that once cradled carved inscriptions, and scattered fragments of quartz that wink in the lunar radiance. Each subtle contour reads like a word in an ancient poem, guiding footsteps that follow no map but memory itself. As you step forward, a hush settles over the desert, broken only by the soft sigh of wind over sand, a farewell whisper from the dunes. Half-remembered tales surface in that hush, echoing stories of caravans setting forth by full moon. Ibn Battuta's Rila recalls departing an oasis under Sharvar's pale throne, believing the moon's path would smooth dunes and reveal hidden watercourses. Medieval geographers documented lunar-based navigation as a practical art, linking celestial cycles to safe passage across hostile sands. Historians are still debating whether these lunar rituals reflect widespread practice or romantic exaggeration in travelogues. Nevertheless, the moon's quiet guidance remains as vital now as it was then, casting an unerring line toward home. Mirages of column shafts rise and collapse at the horizon's edge, mirroring the mind's half-dreamt illusions. In the same way that sandstorms reshape entire landscapes overnight, moonlight can sculpt phantoms of ancient walls only to dissolve them in a single breath of wind. Acoustic geologists studying singing sands note that dunes can produce deep humming when the sand moves, lending an almost musical accompaniment to moonlit journeys. Few outside specialized circles appreciate how these natural sonics might mimic distant water or shifting marble. Historians are still debating whether such sonic cues ever served as navigation aids in desert lore. Faint puffs of dew gather on leather straps and folds of cloth, a phenomenon once thought impossible in the arid heart of the Sahara. Early Bedouin accounts describe placing cloths over camel saddles at dawn to collect moisture, which was then squeezed into skins as a precious supplement to scarce water supplies. Modern meteorologists acknowledge desert dew formation under specific conditions of temperature inversion, yet the exact frequency of these microfogs remains uncertain. Scholars are still debating how reliably dew could have supplemented caravan provisions on long journeys. A chorus of night creatures stirs around hidden rock crevices. The distant bark of a sand fox, the coy howls of desert wolves, and the soft scuttle of geckos across sun-warmed stone. Tales tell of luminous geckos whose tails glimmer in moonlight, leading thirsty travelers to secret springs. A lone biologist once reported phosphorescent cells in a desert species, but lack of subsequent sightings fuels skepticism. Historians are still debating whether legend or rare biology explains these glowing lizards. Scattered shards of pottery half buried in the sand tell of camps abandoned in haste. Bowls glazed with cobalt blue and painted in swirl motifs that mirror the night sky. Archaeologists link similar shards to caravanserai workshops in Africa, dated by thermoluminescence to the 11th century. That mainstream dating aligns with peak trans-Saharan trade, when gold and slaves traveled north and salt caravans ventured south. Yet no single site has yielded enough context to confirm direct ties to Zerzura, leaving scholars divided on whether those shards once bore messages to the hidden city. Historians are still debating the shards' provenance. Wind-sculpted ripples shift underfoot, and each step carries a grain of yesterday's discovery and a whisper of tomorrow's promise. A faint ridge ahead looks like the toppled remains of a palace arch, but as the moon slides behind a drifting veil of cloud, it reverts to unremarkable sand. That momentary flash evokes how brief glimpses of the lost water temple emerged during one sudden dune collapse, only to vanish again the next night. Mainstream records note the collapse but disagree on its date. Bedouin elders chart it on their own lunar calendar. Historians are still debating those conflicting chronologies. A small cluster of wind-beaten palm trunks rises like spectral sentinels on a distant ridge. Though long dead, their weathered fibers still protrude from the dunes, marking where Zerzura's sacred palm grove once flourished. Obscure botanical studies recovered pollen trapped in ancient mortar, matching modern varieties of Phoenix dactylifera. That find suggests a continuity of date palm genetics across 2 millennia. Yet geneticists question whether modern oasis palms truly descend from those lineages or result from later replanting by surviving tribes. Historians are still debating the grove's botanical legacy. Midnight's hush deepens as a lone owl glides overhead, its call a mournful echo that seems to reverberate through the dunes. Folklorists record variations of that hoot as warnings against wandering too far from caravan lines. Some insist the owl's call marks jinn territory, while others believe it simply reflects the bird's breeding cycle. Historians are still debating whether the mythic waiting of nocturnal calls overlays natural behavior or vice versa. A sudden gust carries a strange fragrance, crushed desert thyme mixed with ancient incense. Vetiver roots exhumed in basalt-lined tombs in the Tibesti Hills confirm local use of aromatic herbs in funerary rites. That mainstream discovery aligns with fragments of liturgical texts mentioning fragrant offerings to river and spring spirits. Yet whether Zerzura's farewell rites included such incense remains unknown. Historians are still debating how botanical gifts shaped ritual practice in lost desert temples. Fingertips brush against rough sandstone where hidden tunnels once yawned open, beckoning with the promise of a secret world. Legends claim that at the moon's zenith, echoes of chanting priests still drift through those corridors, guiding worthy seekers onward. Acoustic archaeologists note that empty tunnels can carry sound remarkably far. However, no modern survey has recorded voices in the abandoned passageways. Historians are still debating whether such chants were engineered or imagined by longing minds. Memories congeal into a tapestry. The shimmer of an obsidian sphinx under pre-dawn light, the gleam of gold chambers, the hush of the lost water temple's dripping springs. Each recollection feels both vivid and abstract, like a dream recalled at dawn's edge. Psychologists studying hypnagogic imagery note that desert conditions, heat, isolation, and sensory monotony can heighten dreamlike experiences during waking hours. Yet anthropologists debate whether those experiences informed oral traditions or derived from them. Historians are still debating the interplay between perception and storytelling in barren landscapes. A final hillock stands between now and familiar roads. At its crest, the horizon yawns open, revealing the distant lights of settlement walls, soft glimmers against the star-scattered sky. Those lights once signified safety to weary travelers, marking wells, markets, and the promise of fresh bread at sunrise. Medieval cookbooks record recipes for flatbreads baked in clay ovens fueled by date pits, a culinary link tying desert voyages to homebound feasts. Historians are still debating how foodways migrated along trade routes, blending nomadic staples with oasis fare. Stepping down toward that edge, every dune behind seems to bow in farewell, its ridges glowing like amber waves in reverse. The moon's silver arc lowers slowly, guiding each step until it dips beyond the horizon, and stars take up the hymn. Camels kneel in unison, their attendants draping cloth across saddles and whispering prayers of gratitude. That final act of reverence, shared among humans and beasts, mirrors ceremonies described in 9th century Arab texts. Yet those texts name no specific city, leaving Zerzura's place in ritual unpinned. Historians are still debating whether the links between desert rites and written records ever coincide. At last, the first blush of dawn curls across the desert rim, painting dunes in rose and ochre. The moonlit farewell, born of silent steps and whispered oaths, concludes as all journeys must. Memories of hidden gates and golden halls fade with each shifting grain, yet their echo lingers within the heart, a soft murmur that carries across every dune. Soft hues of dawn unfold across the tranquil desert, each ripple of light a gentle caress upon the silent sand. Breath comes easy now, each exhale a gentle wave washing over tired limbs and easing the mind into sweet surrender. Eyes grow heavy as the morning breeze stirs a lullaby among distant palm fronds, and thoughts drift like drifting petals on a still pond. The world softens, and every worry fades beneath a sky brushed with pastel promise. Rest in this expansive quiet, where horizons stretch beyond the reach of day's demands. Let the desert's ancient hush cradle you, its soft murmur weaving a tapestry of peace around each sigh. Imagine cool waters trickling over thirsty stones, fragrant blooms nodding beneath the breeze, and warm sunlight unfurling across every curve of the dunes. In this gentle moment, the heart finds room to breathe,